Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the 18th annual Symposium on the Conservation and Biology of Tortoises and Freshwater Turtles. We've got talks coming to you today from all around the world, from Brazil to Madagascar to India and Bangladesh and Australia. And welcome to week 3. And let me turn that off. And I want you all to enjoy. We've had a minor schedule change. Tomas Diane is going to be rescheduled to another day. But right now, we're going to kick things off with Darren Norris. So enjoy.
Thank you, David. Hi from Brazil. I'm Darren Norris. I'm going to be talking to you today about some of the analysis that we've been developing that we hope can help the conservation of the South American turtles. So for some time, efforts have been made to try to systemize measures of species conservation success or to understand the impact of conservation actions. And since 2012, the IUCN has been working to establish some standardized criteria. And today, this has now become consolidated into what's been called the Green Status Assessment. This article was published in 2018, and now it's really coming to the time where the green status is increasing and widely recognized as something that could be really useful. So here, we're going to adopt an approach that generates population projections within the green status framework. And with this, we're going to be able to identify spatially explicit priorities and also set some achievable targets. This slide at the bottom here is just showing the link to the species specialist group at the IUCN, where you can find more details regarding green list and all details of some of the metrics that I'm presenting. So many species of turtles are increasingly threatened. In South America, there are 7 species of the Podocnemidae. These are tropical species and all are threatened. They can be wide-ranging, that's continental scale ranges of 8 million square kilometers, or rather localized. There's the species highlighted here on the screen is limited to a single river catchment in Colombia. And there's different degrees of threat. We're going to be looking at 6 focal species, and the major threat is overexploitation. And there's been what they call fishing down the food chain, starting with the biggest, and after this gets harder, over-harvesting smaller size species and so on. But then together with this, there's other threats from deforestation, damming, mining, urbanization. So the 6 species we're looking at here have size class distribution across a broad range. So we've got the very large expanser to a rather small, unpronounceably named species. And the size is really important because it to a large extent determines preference by human exploitation. The graph here is showing size distribution from 165 tropical and temperate species. All 6 have similar natural history. Females nest out of the water, and it is at this time, nesting out of the water, that the females are really heavily targeted. Over 50 years, a variety of conservation actions have been developed. So looking at the slide here, over on the left, showing examples. This is environmental education, it's protecting nesting areas, it's in situ protection of nests, ex situ head starting, whole mix. And this mixes across South America. Different countries have their own variations, have their own priorities, but the that particular message that comes across is doing this in isolation doesn't work. Basically, there's a problem in the coordination between different groups and integration of the different actions that are necessary. And this is where turtles are also fantastic flagellate species. So all this effort isn't just for turtles. It's also for all the different species that share the same habitats that they depend on. So what did we do? We conducted a green status assessment for these 6 species. And this looks to quantify 3 metrics. This is conservation dependence, expected gains, and then look at recovery potential over the long term. And here we adopted a precautionary and probable approach. Well, we like to think it was. So precautionary in that we didn't include deforestation. We haven't included mining, climate change, and probable in that we were able to generate confidence intervals, look at the sensitivities throughout the whole modeling process. And the process is details depend on the species. But basically what we do is we look to identify spatial units, and these are river catchments where the species is present. So to do this, we went to the literature. This is an effort in collating data that has been published. So we're picking data from articles, reports. This is Spanish, Portuguese, English, and also the national action plans. And then with this, we then go to look at the distribution of the species in terms of suitable habitat for these turtles. And this depends largely on rivers. So the rivers are the focus of our modeling process. And then with the distribution, we're putting together population dynamics, particularly focusing on stages that are linked to human overexploitation. So this includes adult stages and the early stages, which is up to a year old. So developing these models, again, all these parameters are obtained from published literature, been decades of really hard work across South America. And we're now coming to a point where it's possible to actually integrate this and start to generate some new insights. And we did this through some spatially explicit simulations, which is looking at if we use protected areas in relation to the accessibility of these rivers to people. We're not looking at individual impacts of different people. We're assuming that if you're close to people, there's going to be an impact. So we're using these simulations to model probable impacts on populations of the different species. And then to the results, what did we find? We're looking here at likely changes in the global populations without any direct and effective conservation. And as you see here, at least 3 of them, we're looking at severe and rapid losses within 50 years. So this is largely to do with overharvesting, and it's really likely that the damage is going to be done before any climate change impacts actually kick in. And the table shows the global values, but we're also then able to look at the different spatial units. The map on the left there is showing the change in one of the more widespread species, Uniphilis, across its range. And then the next metric we looked at were the gains. So if we can make conservation effective, what can we achieve? What can we do for these species? And what we found here was that with protected areas, which is shown in orange, community-based management light green here, and integrating the two, which is the dark green, when we're integrating community-based management, we're actually approaching 3-fold population increase within 50 years for 2 of the species. So there's some potential for some relatively rapid recoveries. And over the long term, which is 100 years, we also see that there is different degrees of recovery potential. These are the green arrows on the right. These are sizes proportional to the recovery potential. So red list and green status are complementary. We're able to, with the green status, add novel insights, what we consider to be novel insights. And what we're showing is that if conservation actions focus on recovery, we should obviously also be able to improve the species conservation status. And so this has been I'm just giving a general overview here, obviously not going into the details, but there's some challenges with the red list approach. These include desensitization, generating this culture of despair, but at the same time, recovery is not going to be easy. The path to recovery are poorly understood, and from a research point of view, really lacking information on density dependence, which is one of the key aspects likely to drive future population growth or not. And so this is, if anyone is working with density dependence with these species, please enter in contact, because this is the one aspect that we're really struggling with, have no data on this for this group whatsoever. So this green status approach, looking to open novel opportunities for positive reinforcement. This is have different conversations with politicians, enable to present the work that's been carried out in a way that could actually generate positive responses, positive interest. With integrated solutions, we're predicting there could be 3-fold continental scale increase within 50 years for some of these species. But for this to work, we've obviously got to prioritize the conservation of the cultural diversity along Amazonian rivers. If we are able to support the work of the local communities, community-based management can expand and accelerate species recovery. And so just to finish off here, green status approach provides new opportunities, perhaps a refresh for us all, combining a green status assessment with a bit of conservation optimism. Maybe we can be committed to 100% turtle recovery. Now, probably this won't be feasible for all species, but it's a really useful benchmark to actively promote species conservation for turtles. So, thank you very much for your attention, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, we're going to move to the next speaker now. Thank you, Darren. Your presentation was great. And up next is Cesar Ramon. Are you ready?
Hello, do you guys see my screen? Hello, good afternoon. My name is Caesar. I'm from Bangladesh. So I work for the NGO called Creative Conservation Alliance, or CCA. We work with turtles and tortoises in Bangladesh, and we also work with different other species like pangolins, Burmese pythons. We also do a lot of community-based conservation work. We do believe in hands-on, boots on the ground conservation work. So today I'll give you an overview of our current conservation projects involving turtles in Bangladesh. Oops, I can't go to the next slides. All right, so sorry, I'm having difficulty going to my slides. So to give you an overview of the turtles in Bangladesh, Bangladesh has a very high diversity of turtles and tortoises. We fall within the lower Gangetic Plain turtle priority area, and eastern side of Bangladesh, which is a mixed evergreen hilly areas, falls within the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. To date, 25 species of turtles, freshwater turtles and tortoises have been recorded, and 21 of them are globally threatened. And the species, the tricornate hill turtle, the Melanocheles tricornata, which is found in the Terai region of Nepal and India, is recorded from Bangladesh, but we believe that is probably misidentification, and possibly Melanocheles tricornata doesn't occur in Bangladesh, and we haven't had any recent record. And the other species, Morenia ocellata, the Burmese eye turtle, possibly occur in Bangladesh. We found a shell in a market a couple years back, and we believe probably coming from within the country's population. So we know very little on the turtle and tortoises in Bangladesh. There are some historical published information on turtle trade and some basic nesting ecology of some of the common species. But other than that, we have very little information. And our organization, CCA, has been working on 5 species of turtles. And there is another group from Vienna Zoo led by Dr. Peter Prishak, and also in collaboration with Bangladesh Forest Department and Nature and Life Foundation Bangladesh. They've been working on the Batagur Baska conservation breeding program. So we work, our focus area is in the southeast of Bangladesh. You see in the red circle. And on the center, that's our Turtle Conservation Center. That's near Dhaka. But in the southeast of Bangladesh, we have been working for the last 10 years. And it's culturally and geographically resemble more in northeastern India and Myanmar. And it's part of the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. And it's not been not very hospitable for research and scientists because of its restricted area and also a very remote rugged terrain. So there hasn't been done a lot of work until we ventured to that area in around a decade ago, and we have discovered so many species, and we found over 32 globally threatened species, including the large mammal like elephants, clouded leopards, and the big cats. And there are 8 species of turtles have been recorded from Bangladesh, from that Chittagong Hill Tracts area. So 4 of them are critically endangered. Here are some pictures. On the left is the critical endangered Manoriamies, Asian giant tortoise, and on the right is Husamies depressa, that species that was thought to be only endemic to Myanmar, Western Myanmar, until we discovered the new population in 2014. And also on the left bottom is the critical endangered Kura mohuti. We also discovered this species for the first time in Bangladesh, and then we have Panchura silatensis, called the Silet roof turtle, and the critical endangered Inutus tudelongata as well. We also have the soft shell, the Amidonata, and the other box turtle, the Kura ambenensis, and also the Lysamis punctata are found mostly in the urban areas in the ponds. And here's some pictures. So this on the left, there's some amazing forests. That's some of the last remaining primary mixed evergreen forests left in Bangladesh. And as you can see on the right side, be a lot of destruction, lots of logging, encroachment, new developments by roads by the government, and also slash and burn hasn't been very sustainable. As you see on the top, on the bottom right is a picture of some shell of Arakan forest turtles. Hunting has been an issue for turtles and tortoises in that region as well. So what we have been doing for the last 5 to 6 years, we have been working with the local communities to support them, to motivate them for conservation. And many of the indigenous tribes, such as the Mro, they are very much in tune with nature, and they have some traditional rituals and beliefs, such as the practicing of the community forest that they used to do. But unfortunately, as everything is changing and the population hasn't been increasing, the practice of community protected forest has been eroding. So we have been working with 10 villages. We have been motivating them to helping them to manage like 10 community managed forests. And one of our programs is Schools for Conservation, which basically provides free education service for their indigenous kids, because the area is extremely remote and most of them don't have a government school facility anywhere. So that's kind of supporting them and offsetting the cost of conservation. And so far, every year we provide education for about more than 100 students from 10 villages in remote areas. We also support other livelihood options, such as we have some craft program. We also provide them with like sustainable agriculture, like slash and mulch. And we also have a parabologist program, which employs former hunter as a parabologist, and those people become the ambassador for conservation. So as you can see in the last slides, the larger areas have been destroyed, but we believe if we work closely with the communities, we can protect the smaller patches, and those smaller patches of community managed forest can provide suitable habitat for turtles and tortoises. So here is a satellite image of some of our results. Like on the left is a picture of one of our community forests taken in 2015. On the right side, taken earlier this year. So you can see the difference between the pre-intervention and post-intervention. It clearly shows the forests are regenerating. We have motivated those communities to really demarcated certain areas and help them grow forests. So this not only helping the biodiversity as well as also ensuring the water security of those people, because water crisis have been severe in the recent years. So we also have this parabologist program. On the left side, you see on the top, Mangin, on one of our parabologists. He has been working for us for the last 6 years. And so parabologists like Mangin, they visit those areas and they try to rescue individual of turtles and tortoises, which are captured by the local hunters primarily for consumption. So for the last few years, we have rescued and released about 130 critically endangered species of turtles and tortoises. And we estimating roughly about 1/4 to about 25% to 50% of the hunting decline in that area, because the people are agreeing to cease consumption because they're getting direct benefit from our program, like the School for Conservation. And obviously not everyone do adhere to the guidelines, but we believe that the specimens captured are evidence that they're giving up hunting, and that's kind of shows some of the success. And unfortunately, some of the species like the Manoriamies, Asian giant tortoise, and the Arakan forest turtle have been found in such extreme low density. Therefore, if we want to recover their wild population, we have to get into captive breeding and ultimately release the offsprings to reinforce their population and help them for population recovery. So that how our Turtle Conservation Center was born, that established in 2017 in 40 kilometers north of the capital, Dhaka. We are conducting this project in support with Bangladesh Forest Department and several other donors. So the ultimate vision of our conservation breeding center is to increase the numbers in captivity and eventually release them in the wild to recover their wild population. So we have 4 species of turtles and tortoises in our center. We have 8 individuals of the Manoriamies, 5 females and 3 males. We also have some individuals of Hissimis depressa, Kuramhoti, and Indicus delongata. And we're hoping that we'd be able to transfer some of the rescued individuals back to our center so that they can contribute for conservation breeding. So for the last 3 years, since our establishment was started, we have been focusing mostly on the captive breeding of the Manoriamies. So this is a picture of our center, basically housing facility for our staff. We have 2 full-time staff, and we have managers, and we have volunteers helping us to run the center. And here's our one of the enclosure. We have because the area is in a dry deciduous forest, so we have to ensure enough moisture. So we have a sprinkler, and we also have ponds for the animals. We have a incubator facility that we have established. And so our focal species for the last couple of years has been the Manoriamies, the largest tortoise of Asia. And so we have been successfully breeding them for the last 2 years. So in 2019, we have got 46 hatchlings, and 27 survived, 19 individuals died. And this year we got 56 hatchlings so far. And we're hoping to get more individuals, and we're hoping to increase the numbers in captivity. So we are planning for a pilot reintroduction of Manoriamies in next year. And as you can, there's a picture on the bottom left that some of the individuals in 1 year individual has grown to over 300 grams, and we're expecting those individuals will reach up to about 500 to 600 grams. And we have already been in dialogue with the local villagers. One of the community managed forest, around 200 hectares, have agreed to release, work with us and release the baby tortoise, the captive bred tortoises. And we're planning to continue support the communities and give them different livelihood options, such as mixed orchard, which will encourage them to reduce the dependency on the forest resources. And some of the villages already getting benefit from our school for conservation. So that's kind of motivating them, and they see a sense of ownership. And we do plan to reintroduce, radio track them after release. And we believe that the release program will initiate a better rapport with the communities and other stakeholders, because historically there are so many other captive breeding projects in Bangladesh which initiate the captive breeding very successfully. However, they don't really, a lot of those programs fail to reintroduce in the wild. So captive breeding programs can often be seen negatively in this country. And as I see that we've taken the individuals back from the forest and putting them in a center. So, so if we believe that if we release them, we can show some of the evidence of success, then that would ultimately gain support for bigger conservation of the species in the Bangladesh. So one of the second projects we have been working on is the black softshell. So we have a shrine in Chittagong in the southeast of Bangladesh. And about a 2 acres pond, and that's probably the only non-captive population of Niloxenia nigricans, or the black softshell in Bangladesh, and estimated about 200 to 400 individuals living within the pond. There are some basic published studies on their breeding biology, but still we still don't know much about their ecology in the wild. So the temple had a nesting areas, but unfortunately, because of the development of the structure, like the mosque, this concrete facility like market around the pond, there haven't been much nesting areas available. So currently the temple had a very poor hatchling recruitment and hatching success. So we started working, we visited the pond 2 years ago, and we discussed with the Shrine Authority, and they asked for our help, and we have been working with the pond authority and helping them to increase the hatchling recruitment. Oops, I'm having difficulty going to the menu slides. So, all right, so in last year, in 2019, we hatched about 38 black softshell, and this year we reached about 150 hatchlings. We were targeting for like about 500 to 600 hatchlings, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to restrict some of our field activities. So, however, 150 hatchlings have been born this year, and that's helping us to really build a rapport with the Shrine Authority as well. And this year, we have established hatchling pond. The goal is to keep the hatchlings until they grow about big enough so that they can survive in the pond. But ultimately, we do eventually planning for the wild reintroduction of the species, and we have been on dialogue with the Forest Department and the Shrine Authority to establish a second captive population of the species in different areas. And this is some of the pictures, our incubator facility in the Shrine. And that's the beautiful hatchlings, black softshell. And here's a picture of, we constructed this pond in this year. And so about 20 by 25 feet pond where we are planning to keep the hatchlings. So moving forward, we're planning to initiate reintroduction of Manoriamies next year, and that we'll be releasing them in one of the sites, and hopefully we'll be able to get more individual adult of Manoriamies, and then they can contribute in the captive breeding population as well. And we're also hoping to initiate breeding of Hisomis depressa and Indotestus elongata in the next couple of years. And we're also planning to expand our turtle conservation center facility. We plan to have a larger enclosure for handling of and rehabilitation of rescued individuals of turtles and tortoises. And we are also working to help establish a second population of black softshell, collaborating with the Shrine Authority as well. So that some of the individuals can be head started and can be hopefully released back in the wetlands of Bangladesh where they historically occurred. And they're still found in low density population in the northern part of Bangladesh. And so as I mentioned earlier, we have so little information available on the turtles of Bangladesh. We also don't know very little, don't know much about the river turtles in Bangladesh, especially some of the species like Bartagor kachuga, Bartagor hangoka, and also Chitra indica. Some of the species have been very rare. So we are planning to conduct surveys of river turtles in the northern part of Bangladesh and also in the northeast part of Bangladesh in the wetlands. And we do believe there are a lot of possibilities for transboundary cooperation with India and Myanmar program, especially for the reintroduction of Manoriamies. So here are some acknowledgements. We're grateful for our donors for supporting our project. And so that was it. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
First one we have is, get it in front of me again. How are the turtles perceived by local populations? Do they view them as holy or dirty or as a food delicacy or taboo, or are they hunted for export?
Okay, so for the first question, So the turtles are historically, so the communities living in the area are primarily subsistence hunter. So they primarily hunt turtles and tortoises for food. And they usually hunt turtles using their hunting dog. And usually those are opportunistic hunting. So, usually turtles population have been declining because also of the destruction of the forest, but there is no delicacy or food or any of the taboo. But so far we haven't found any evidence of commercial harvesting of turtles and tortoises in that area. But the communities have been supportive of our program, and whenever they see an incentive, because for them turtles are food. So whenever they see incentive, they're getting benefit from this project, and that can motivate some of the communities for conservation. All right, David.
The second question, did you get that one? How can you ensure the sustainability of the Parabologist program?
All right, so yes, that's a very good question. So that's one of our the biggest challenge that we have been facing. So we had 10 parabiologists. Because of lack of funding in the recent years, we have currently employing 5 parabiologists, and the more the better, because the more funding we have, the more parabiologists we can hire, and so that it can ensure it can cover a larger area and collect information. So so currently we have been depending on the grants and the donor funding. So far that's the only way we have been maintaining our program, but absolutely we have been looking for other ventures. For example, our Turtle Conservation Center can be a site for ecotourism, whether we can collect some revenue from the visiting school groups and from other people, because it can provide them such a unique experience of for the turtles and tortoises, like we've seen in other programs like the Galapagos tortoises. So that's one way we're planning to make our program a bit more sustainable. And also we're planning for sponsor a parabologist or adopt a turtle. That's something that we have been planning to launch in the near future. All right, so the third question, has there been genetic work done on the Bostami turtles? So there has been some work done by Dr. Peter Prashag, but I think one of the key questions we need to find out to survey for the river turtles to find the wild population of the Bostami turtles in the river. But I think there is also opportunities for a lot of genetic work as well. Is there any more question?
I believe that is it, Caesar. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, David. I'll log off.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Let me just make sure that I've got the chat going here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen, and we are good to go. So, okay. Hi, my name is, I'm Emily Wilder, and I'm the program manager for Grassroots Wildlife Conservation Program at Zoo New England here in Boston. So our program, we're focused on addressing local wildlife conservation issues through population monitoring and management, and we have a really strong citizens engagement component. So we wanted to share some of the lessons that we've learned from over 10 years of working with schools, because we've often been asked questions about this from other organizations that are contemplating similar collaborations. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on our turtle head starting program, but I will note that we do also work with and have similar programs with other taxa as well. Okay, so our turtle head starting program is called Hatch. We've been head starting turtles since 2007, and we began working with schools in 2009. To date, we've head started and released over 1,000 turtles, mostly Blanding's turtles, but also wood turtles, Eastern box turtles, in a few instances, snapping turtles, and also hopefully soon some spotted turtles. So the first 2 years, we raised a small number of turtles at the zoo, as well as at the homes of some staff and volunteers. But it really quickly became apparent to us that we needed more capacity to raise hatchlings. And Dr. Brian Windmiller, who founded this project, thought to emulate the Massachusetts Northern Red-Bellied Cooter head starting program, which had school involvement. So currently we work with 1,000 turtles, and we work with more than 40 schools, and we engage 3,000 students annually. So why work with schools, right? Right now, some of you may have some of the same skeptical faces as some of these third graders. Head starting is a pretty common conservation intervention strategy used with turtles around the world, but there are very few programs that are run through schools, right? At least that we know of. But there are some real benefits to working with schools. First of all, I think the biggest benefit of working with schools is that you can build a constituency of people, especially kids, who care about turtle conservation, right? As the saying goes, right, you won't save what you don't love, and you won't love what you don't know. And we really believe that the best hope for wildlife is having as many people as possible know about and love wildlife, especially the wildlife that live around them. So this is really also an opportunity to reach a wider audience beyond the normal constituents that maybe walk through your door or read your website. And on top of that, with a classroom raising turtles, right, you're engaging with them for an entire year. And that's going to have a much greater effect than a one-time public lecture or volunteer event. Working with schools is also an opportunity to distribute the labor, right? Caring for turtles is a lot of work, as those of you who do that know. And by working with schools, you expand your capacity. And finally, we found that working with schools is a source of income or revenue for conservation. So at a very minimum, you're sharing those husbandry costs. But we've also found that many schools have funds set aside for external programming, and turtle head starting is a really good opportunity for hands-on STEM learning, and schools are very, very interested. We've been able to defray some of our field costs, such as radio tracking and nest surveying, through income from school programming. And also, we also apply for grants that help us provide free programming to schools that are in underserved communities that might not have the funds for those external programming, so we can make sure to reach a wide audience of students. So if it's so great, right, why don't more organizations work with schools? I think the first issue that we've seen cited most often is regulations and permitting. For good reason, right? There are often strict laws on who can handle rare and endangered species and under what circumstances. And your state regulatory authorities might be uncomfortable in extending your permit to apply to schools. And I think one reason that they or you might be concerned is that schools might not do a good job or follow proper protocols. I think another reason people express concern is about kind of concern of sending the wrong message, right? For example, we don't want kids thinking that it's okay to just grab animals from the wild and bring them home as pets. But our experience shows that really we can address these concerns. And in fact, given the proper guidance, schools can be really excellent turtle caretakers, and in some cases perform better than institutions. And I'm going to share with you some of the ways that we make that happen. So what are the basic elements of a successful school-based head starting program? I'm going to go through each of these in turn. First, and really most importantly, you need a sound scientific and conservation basis for your program, right? Head starting is not appropriate in all situations, and even where it is appropriate, it needs to be combined with other conservation efforts that address the root causes of population decline. So before you bring your conservation program to a school, you've really got to know that you've done the background analysis and especially the field work to determine whether the project is merited and effective. And establishing scientific merit isn't just a one and done operation either, right? Your program needs to involve continuous data collection, analysis, reevaluation, and really most importantly, you need to be collecting data on the survival and growth of your head-started turtles after you release them back to the wild, because that's the only way you're going to know if your program is providing a conservation benefit to the population. So for example, at our populations, of the 1,000+ turtles that we've head started and released, we've radio tracked more than 200 of those, some for more than 5 continuous years. The second element that you're going to need for a successful program is committed partners, right? You need enthusiastic teachers and you need supportive regulators. I have the project leader listed as, quote, the scientist here because, as I just noted, right, we really think it's imperative that projects be primarily scientific, not educational. So for example, as a zoo, we have both scientific and educational specialists that are involved in our program, but the program is driven by the scientists to ensure that we are always staying focused on those scientific objectives. One more partner that you're gonna need, oops, I'm sorry, is veterinary expertise. So if you're a zoo like us, right, you might have this in-house, but if not, you're going to need to reach out to establish a connection with a wild animal clinic or a veterinarian that has substantial experience working with turtles. It's pretty rare that we have health concerns during our turtle head starting, but it definitely does happen. So you need to have a plan in place for who you're going to call if you have a turtle injury or health concern. And the last thing that we believe that you need is age-appropriate educational curriculum, right? It's certainly possible to partner with schools without providing them with any associated curriculum, but we feel like the impacts of that kind of partnership are then much more dependent on the effort and knowledge of the teacher or teachers that are involved, and they might not have the desired outcomes that you're looking for. So at the very, very least, you're going to want to be providing your classrooms with a background on your conservation program and the main take-home lessons that you want them to remember, such as not to move turtles or that turtles aren't good pets or whatever the issues are in your region. So let's say that you're interested in doing this, but you want to make sure you don't like one of our texts here. What are some of those common pitfalls that you want to avoid? I think the first common pitfall is having like a top-down approach. So we see a lot of problems when you get directives that come from on high. So for example, if a school principal really likes the program and then forces teachers to participate, the program's going to suffer, right? At best, those disinterested teachers are not going to take full advantage of the program. They're not going to communicate much enthusiasm to the students. And at worst, right, they might do a bad job caring for your turtles and you might have health issues. You also get similar problems if there's a top-down approach within your organizational leadership that says, like, we really want to do this, but you know, the people who are actually implementing it don't have the capacity or the interest in the program, right? A lot of our conservation organizations are understaffed and overburdened, and taking on a school partnership is not a simple endeavor. So you really want to make sure you have buy-in at all levels of your organization. The second common pitfall is trying to grow too big too fast, right? You don't want to get greedy like Skittles here. If this is something that you haven't done before, if you haven't worked with schools, you really want to start small, right? Maybe just working with a few schools initially. You really want to make sure that you have that capacity to communicate with all the teachers and visit them regularly and make sure that everything is going smoothly. And the third pitfall is something that I'm calling tail wagging the turtle. And by this, I just mean don't let your educational goals unduly influence the conservation program. So sometimes it can be easy to get wrapped up in your educational program and lose sight of your conservation objectives. And like, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but again, you always want to keep those conservation goals front and center. And also don't be shy about sharing those goals with your students, right? It's really, really empowering for kids to realize that they're part of a real scientific project, and kids actually just love that. So the last thing I want to talk about here is risk mitigation. So there are a few different aspects to risk mitigation, and the first one is welfare of the individual animals. So of course, we want to make sure that the animals that are in schools are being taken care of well. And a few things that we have found are key to this are, first of all, providing schools with a detailed care manual, right, that outlines all the protocols, expectations, supplies, techniques. But we also know that just giving someone a manual doesn't mean they're going to read it. So you also really want to make sure that you have training sessions for teachers and students, right? We have face-to-face training sessions with all of our new teachers, and we have our students all watch a video that goes over things like safe turtle handling and feeding, etc. And finally, we have regular communications with all of our teachers, right? We're visiting them on a regular basis. We send them monthly newsletters, and they are also submitting to us monthly data on their turtle growth. So there's a lot of back and forth that's happening there. Now, the second aspect of risk mitigation is welfare of the wild population, right? Again, it's a conservation program. We want to make sure we're helping the wild population, and we want to minimize any possibility of introducing non-native pathogens to the wild population. So to that end, we're following really strict isolation protocols, and we're regularly inspecting classrooms to make sure that there are no other cold-blooded vertebrates in the classroom and that the classrooms are following those safe handling protocols. We also teach our students about disease risk, right? We explain to them things like how dumping your unwanted goldfish into the local pond can create invasive species or make native animals sick. And finally, we're also, like I said, right, we're conducting a lot of that post-release monitoring and field work in the wild population to keep tabs on the wild population and make sure that things are going well. And I think the final aspect of risk mitigation is sending the right message, right? We want to teach kids that wild animals are best left in the wild. And we teach our students, right, that participate, that they actually have a special permit from the state to be raising the turtles, and that if they didn't have a permit, they could get arrested. They learn that they're part of a conservation program, and that it's only because they're part of this program with scientists that are carefully monitoring the population that it's okay to bring the turtles in for head starting. We're also teaching kids that turtles don't make good pets, right? Because of how long-lived they are. And so that the best way to enjoy turtles, if they love turtles, is to enjoy them in the wild. And finally, the message that we try to hammer home in every interaction we have with students is that, and this is really core to our mission, is that we can make a difference, right? Kids are constantly being bombarded with negative environmental messages from the climate crisis, right? Mass extinction, trash in the oceans. We hear from kids and also many adults who are demoralized and feel a lot of despair about the future, right? But actually there is hope. There are environmental success stories, and there are ways that each one of us can make a difference and are making a difference. And so through Head Starting a Turtle, kids feel empowered. They see, right, firsthand how they've made a difference for their little turtle, and how that little turtle is now part of a larger population and part of a community of wildlife in their town or their region. So we really hope that more organizations partner with schools and help share this message of optimism and hope and love for nature with as many kids as possible. So what are the next steps? We are currently working on publishing some of our results, both of the head starting results in the classroom and then that post-release monitoring information. And we're also working on a more in-depth manual that goes through some of the topics that I've just covered, thinking about, for basically like more in-depth, if an organization is interested in working with schools, what are the things that they need to think about? So if that's something that is interesting to you, or you have further questions, or you just want to find out when that manual becomes available, definitely contact us at gwc@zooengland.org. So I will take any questions that people have. It looks like some have come into the chat, so let me just check those. Okay. Let's see. So question number one was, how can I help with their field studies and Head Start programs? I was a member of NEHS for years and remember when Kurt started the Ruby Ventures program. So I guess it sounds like the question is, how can you help in our program? And definitely get in touch with us if you're interested or you're local and want to be involved. And even if you're not local and want to find out more, get in touch, right? gwc@zooengland.org. There's also a question here about if we're doing any subsidized predator control. We do not do any subsidized predator control at our site. We do have some predation that's happening to our released Head Starts, but it's not a significant factor. So we don't do that. Let's see, so there's a question here about Salmonella. Yeah, so that is in our manual, and we talk about safe handling practices, right? Turtles can carry Salmonella. And, so part of one of the kids learn that they need to wash their hands before and after handling the turtles, that's just good, safe practice. And it hasn't been an issue for us. Yeah, it hasn't been an issue. So that's been really great. And just kind of, so basically just, kind of alleviating those fears and sharing with people, what they can do to mitigate risk is helpful. And it looks like one last question is, so who's taking care of the turtles since schools haven't been in session? So of course, COVID has been extremely fun for us working with schools. And that was obviously a big issue in the spring when, we had all these turtles in schools. We had over 100 turtles that were all around different schools, and suddenly school was shut down. But thankfully, we have very enthusiastic teachers, many of them who have been working with us for since, these past 10 years, year after year. And so most of the teachers actually were able to take their turtles home with them, again, following the same protocols and isolation rules in their homes. And they were able to continue the program and share with their students over webcams and live video feeds and things. And we actually did our turtle release field trips this past year over Zoom. So live turtle release field trips. Obviously, it's not as great as bringing kids out into the wetland and letting them see it directly. But right, we're doing the best with the situation that we have, and we're planning similar virtual programs this school year as well. Okay, so again, thank you everyone so much. And if you want to know more, then let us know and be in touch, gwc@zooengland.org. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
So I hope that one can hear me.
We can.
Yeah. So my name is Miana Kutarsu. I am from Madagascar. I work as animal health manager at TSA Madagascar. So today I'm going to talk to you about the catch confiscation at level of Tortoise Center, rehabilitation and confiscation and rehabilitation. So to start, the related tortoises is one of the 4 endemic tortoises in Madagascar. Their natural distribution is a xeric pine forest in the south and the southern of Madagascar. And it was once one of the more abundant species in the world, but the habitat degradation, local consumption as bushmeat, and the traffic for international pet trade, species rapidly decline. In 2010, this species was the most tortoises in the world and seen in a black market in Asia. So TSA Madagascar was created to reverse this factor. It's like my computer does not work.
I believe we might be falling victim to some technical difficulties at your remote location, Madagascar. And we will work with you and try to get a video upload of your presentation for everyone to see. And we may move on to the next speaker now. So thank you, Nayana. Sriparna, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Thank you.
Hope I'm audible and my screen is in sharing mode.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone from India. I'm Sriparna Datta and I'd like to thank the whole TSS Symposium committee for giving me this opportunity to present and for such a beautiful virtual experience in this tough time. So today I'm going to tell about a citizen science initiative for freshwater turtle conservation in India. So why India requires such an initiative exclusively for turtles? India is home to 29 species of freshwater turtle and tortoises, inhabiting various wildlife habitat and lakes, rivers, and ponds. But there is very lack of information on species distribution, population, and also lack of community awareness about these creatures. So a group of organizations came into action to form the Indian Turtle Conservation Action Network to build this gap. So Indian Turtle Conservation Action Network was formed after the recommendation from National Meeting of Freshwater Turtle and Tortoise held in 2011. It is a platform for giving for exchange of knowledge between various stakeholder organizations and researchers, and it is also a platform for building the gap between freshwater turtle conservation and marine water turtle conservation. This whole network works with three basic tools. First of all, it's the mobile-based application Kurma, about which I am going to tell about in my next part of my presentation. Then we have the advisory committee representing these organizations like WTI, WCCB, Health Path, Dakshin Foundation, and TSA. This advisory committee act as an umbrella over all the actions of this network and act as a guidance and expert and provide their meaningful guidance to the whole team. Next, we have the network of state coordinators and volunteers. From each state, coordinators are deputed who act as a networker or they fill the bridge between various organizations, stakeholders who are interested in turtle conservation in India. They are also deputed to identify interested volunteers who can do turtle surveys, identify critical turtle habitat, and also increase the awareness in their respective states about turtles through various awareness programs like school visits and then turtle walks and a chain of webinars. Next, we have the freshly launched mobile-based application Kurma Tracking Indian Turtle. This application was launched on World Turtle Day, which is freely available in Google Play Store. This application will act as an important tool for species identification and also as an important equipment for all the citizens who will submit their turtle sightings covering a very large spatial and temporal area. So why we decided with the name Kurma? Basically, Kurma is a Sanskrit word for the word tortoise, and according to a very famous epic, Lord Vishnu, who had taken an avatar of a very giant turtle to save the earth from destruction. So that's why to reach a greater mass of people and to connect with every citizen of India, we tried the name Kurma. So before starting about why we wanted to make this application, I want to share with you that TSA India head office in India basically receives about over 100 messages with pictures in WhatsApp and various social media platforms inquiring about turtle identification and their rescue protocols. So, but all these pictures were not getting recorded, and these were very important to understand the species distribution. This is where Kurma becomes important as we wanted to make all those pictures count. So this app will be helpful for generating awareness on species identifications in India. This will also act as a database for all the information coming in from the citizens of India. This app will also help in addressing the most important issue of species identification we are facing with various enforcement agencies and network. And last but not the least, it will also aid helping to aid countrywide rescue and triage of turtles. So talking about the feature of the app, this is the main interface of the application where you can see we have 5 major features. First of all, we can see idea turtle option. This is a basic field guide where you can find basic information about species, including the international and national conservation statuses, their threats, along with their local and vernacular names. And also here you can find the range distribution for every species. Next, we have report a turtle option. This is the most important option of this application, where every users can report a turtle by just uploading a picture in any condition and situation, and also adding the GPS location of the from where the species is spotted. So after that, we have this feature of assistance facilities, where any user, when in any turtle emergency, can locate the nearest assistance facility based on their real-time location in the inbuilt application map. Next, we have also most important features in this application is that connect to an expert, where anyone can very easily connect to an expert asking about turtle identification or for appropriate method of appropriate method to rescue and species. There, we also have a user map where we can see how many users are registering with the application to understand the reach of the application. So progress till date, from the launch on 23rd May 2020, we already have 1,000 plus users. We have received 80 plus observational reports and 20 plus rescue reports. And after that, we have also got 90 recognized facilities who have registered with the app. Here you can see during the starting days we had this much users, and on 1st August, the user number had risen drastically. From the launch, in just 60 days, 20 species has been reported, where you can see we have also got report for critically endangered Batagur dhongoka and Batagur kachuga. And the most interesting thing that we had received while observation of Nilsonia nigricans, black softshell turtle. We had also received 11 rescue reports of 11 species, and you can see the most observational and rescue report is of Lishmish punctata, because after the launch, India is receiving heavy downpour due to monsoon, and this is the time turtles, mainly softshell turtles like Indian flapshell turtle, gets very active and come out of their natural habitat in search of a safer place, and they end up getting into a human habitation, or they can be seen crossing the road. Here you can see northern India and northeast India has the highest observational and rescue report. We already know these two areas are already identified as important turtle priority area, and we believe through this application more critical habitats will be identified. With this, I just want to add that we have make it very encrypted to not to show any species information like their GPS coordinates or location, because we don't want anyone to use this application for any illegal activities. And not only for the critically endangered or endangered species, but also for very common species like Indian flapshell turtle, because we have seen in the recent days this Indian flapshell turtle is taking up the major portion of the illegal turtle, and the major aim, focusing on the major aim of our this full initiative, that keeping common species common, we don't want any other species which are still available plentifully in our rivers to ended up getting in that red list threatened or endangered category. Here you can see our application has already received national and international applaud, and the Environment Minister of India has recognized Kurma as a very important citizen science tool for freshwater turtle fauna of our country. This is how our app is working and will still go on working. First, when citizens add their data, the data will get validated and it will be submitted to the Kurma database. This peer-reviewed data with technology and artificial intelligence will help to develop density, total density and abundance map along with species distribution map. All this information will end up emphasizing on more turtle science and turtle conservation in our country. So in the future, we want and we believe our application will help identify many critical turtle habitats. This application will help us develop various species distributional model, and also it will show the threats, basically the changing threats pattern across the whole country. Right now, we are manually identifying the species in our app, but as more reports come in, the artificial intelligence or AI will kick in and the application will start automatically recognize any species. Next, we want our application to be developed in such a level so that any researcher can do their turtle survey using our app for making checklists, and we also want to build it in a way so that they can make trail map of their study area. We also want to include this app in the monitoring and mandate of various enforcement and agencies and network. Last but not the least, in the future, we will connect with more such citizen science initiatives nationally and globally, and with various organizations who can carry forward with the development of the app and for future sustenance. I would like to thank citizens of India for providing the crucial information in the Kurma database, Turtle Survival Alliance India and Wildlife Conservation Society India for their financial support for developing the app, Leopard Tech Labs and their whole team for their technical support and app development, ITCAN team, including the advisory committee, state coordinators, volunteers, and social media handlers who are working very hard, networking and communicating with citizens and various stakeholders. Last but not least, I want to thank Mr. Josh Lewis for supporting our app development throughout. If anyone wants to volunteer with this citizen science initiative, they can contact us at itcan.contact@gmail.com or can send message to our Facebook and Instagram handle. If anyone wants to support this application, or can contact us kurma.turtlesurvival@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Sripana. We don't have any questions, and go to Ricky next.
Thank you.
And give me a sec. It's 2 a.m. here in Australia. So here we go. Okay, everybody. Let's go. All right. So look, thank you for attending my talk and everyone else's talk. Been some fantastic conservation and community-based conservation talks so far, which is what I want to talk about in Australia. We're at the infancy of implementing what we're calling the 1 Million Turtles Community Conservation Program, which has a real framework around science, and you'll see what I'm talking about there, and involving communities, which is something Australia's been really reluctant to do. It's been really sort of, conservation's been a government thing to do. More so, but I think really being scared about, involving people and aspects that are uncontrollable. But we need to embrace it, because that's where things can get done, and can get done over a broad scale. So we're calling this the 1 Million Turtles Project, and the idea is really to get millions of turtles back into Australian populations, which have been starved of baby turtles for 100 odd years. There's been quite a few papers recently, really important papers about the global declines of freshwater turtles, and Australia's not immune. And I've kind of framed it about where this talk about where have all the Australian turtles gone and why does it matter. So I'm going to sort of talk about that, because we've heard a lot of talks over the last couple of weeks about the wildlife trade, the spectacular which is quite spectacular and in your face. But we don't really have those issues in Australia. It's not so much turtles being ripped out by people, but what we're actually seeing is, significant harvesting and significant mortality, which is largely not seen. And so what we're seeing is declining populations occurring as rapidly as anywhere else in Australia, in the world, out of sight, out of mind. So we've got significant road mortality, which I'll talk about. The big issue is certainly invasive species, foxes particularly, which are the major nest predators and significant destroyer of adult females as well. And over the last couple of years, we've seen some spectacular, I guess, issues around disease with the Bellinger River snapping turtle, but a whole range of other issues related to water quality and agriculture. You can see this turtle in the right-hand corner has been affected by the last drought down in the Murray River system, our major river system, where salinity, fresh water, has essentially turned saline, and it's been affected by marine tube worms, and tens of thousands of these turtles died essentially under our noses. And the other big issue that we'll see, that common species essentially almost being entombed alive by urbanisation. So you can have wetlands, you see the bottom left-hand corner there, that were there, a year or so ago, but essentially filled in by housing, and this is a significant issue. So the first issue I want to sort of highlight is the road mortality, which we just saw in the last talk about citizen science. We use citizen science, used an app called TurtleSat, which we created. And in the first year, the first nesting season, there was a spectacular, I keep using spectacular because we just don't know, we didn't know anything really about mortality. Yes, we see turtles hit on roads, but the scale of it, this is just essentially the first nesting season of people reporting it on the roads throughout southeastern Australia. And this is our most common turtle, and I inverted commas common, called the eastern longneck turtle, which is throughout southeastern Australia. But it's declining, and we're seeing declines of up to 91% throughout, over the last 40 years. Also, I talked about urbanisation, and it's significant. And we've actually now, I guess one of the things we don't really see it being quantified, but we did. So we went and created a wetland inventory for around Sydney, Greater Western Sydney. You can see the middle sort of hotspot area. These are areas that have lost about, you can see in red, and about 20 or 25% of wetlands have essentially been filled in. They're not just removed, they're essentially filled in. And if they're not endangered species, there's really very little is actually done about them. They're just totally clean fill and put houses over the top. And so the same species, the eastern longneck turtle, we've done some landscape modelling, and now you can see on the over here on the right-hand side, sort of a hotspot map, where you can see that the distribution has really become quite fragmented from 2000 to 2007, and then in the last decade, you can see that the hotspots essentially have now become fragmented. And we estimate that there was about 40,000 to 100,000 turtles, eastern longneck turtles, that were either killed, probably killed, or displaced over this time. So this is the cost of urbanisation, and so especially if species, we're seeing declining common species that don't rate on environmental impact statements and that kind of thing, and essentially they're being entombed alive. But the big ubiquitous threat for Australian freshwater turtles are foxes. So foxes are invasive. They were introduced in the late 1800s. And we've shown for the last 40 years that pretty much throughout southeastern Australia, nest predation rates are around 95 to 100%. So there essentially is no recruitment going on in Australian freshwater turtle populations, at least in, particularly the southern half of Australia. The difficulty with foxes, and you'll see why we're sort of dealing them with particularly with management, is that they are so hard to impact, or at least manage them so that we can actually reduce nest predation rates. So if you actually look at the figure above, which is nest predation rate, and on the y-axis, on the x-axis, you'll see an index of fox numbers. What you actually can see here is that it isn't until you get to almost 0 foxes in a population where you actually see declines of nest predation rates. You can see it's largely across, around 90 to 100%, and this is throughout southeastern Australia here. This is data collated throughout, and it's not just one population. So the difficulty is you'd think, and in most management of foxes actually rely on the fact that you actually take one fox out, you'll have an impact on your population by reducing nest predation rates. But you have to essentially eliminate foxes, which is impossible on a landscape level to actually have an impact. So what we're seeing are significant declines. So if we look over here, this is the Murray River system, which is our major freshwater river. It's our food bowl, it's agriculture, but essentially we've done surveys and in particular focus areas for the last 40 years with this team. But this here is actually, on the y-axis, is essentially catch per unit effort of the 3 major species in there. If you go from left to right on the x-axis, you're basically going from the River Murray mouth all the way up to the headwaters. And in this area down here, particularly, where it's, downstream, where you've got the significant impacts of a whole range, including water quality and that sort of thing, we are now seeing declines and almost extinction these are common species. They're not even rated as endangered or threatened. So we're actually now seeing localized extinctions at a regional scale. And this isn't just, as I said, some of our colleagues that are part of this study have been trapping here since the 80s and actually trapping huge biomasses of turtles. So this is a real event that's occurring and is essentially a combination of all of these threats. And I'll quickly show you some of the modeling that we've done and why the combination is really important of threats. So this is again just a model extended out 200 years of a turtle population. The top line up here essentially represents a turtle population with high but variable nest predation rates, and they can handle it. 75% plus or minus 25% nest predation rates, they don't actually decline. They're actually doing pretty well. They're used to high nest predation rates. So, but you then apply the high levels, the extremely high levels since foxes were actually introduced. So 90 plus or minus 10%, they're declining. That's the second line here. So they are being restricted, but you throw that extra threat where we talk about mortality on adult females or disease, those kind of things, those small level of adult predation plus the restriction of recruitment sends the populations in a deep dive towards extinction. And we are now seeing that with some of our most common species. So why does it actually matter? Well, this is what we've been looking at for the last couple of years to actually, as I said, this is hidden. Everyone loves turtles, but they actually fulfill a significant role in the ecosystem. You may have heard, but we've actually had over the last summer in this Murray River system, the Murray-Darling system, we've had significant fish kill events. Millions, absolutely millions of fish have actually died in these systems. But essentially, as you've seen, we've actually lost the turtles out of that system. The other thing is that the Australian government actually wanted to introduce a biocontrol for a virus to control European carp in these systems. So again, costing how much it would take to actually remove dead carp, significant numbers of dead carp. But turtles actually provide that role. If they're actually in there, they're really, really important for that. And we've been doing these mesocosm experiments and now scaling it up. And Claudia Santori, my PhD student, will be talking in a couple of weeks about these experiments. But you can see in the figure here, just looking at water quality, and we've been measuring it. With and without turtles with a fish kill, you can see on the left-hand side, huge amounts of bacteria, cyanobacteria and algae, but within on the right-hand side here of their pretty clear water, and you can see the skeletons actually in there of turtles. That's what they do, they're scavengers, and we can actually quantify those ecosystem services. Okay, so obviously really important for the ecosystem, and we are losing them. Essentially, this is where the Million Turtles program comes into it. And how do we actually strategically manage freshwater turtles throughout these ecosystems? And I'll quickly will just show you what we're trying to do on a landscape level. And essentially, the red area here, this is to scale, represents a harvest population. And so essentially what we're utilizing the longevity of turtles, and we're utilizing their fecundity to actually manage turtles throughout a population by using harvest populations and translocations. So essentially this red area here, the number of turtles that are produced can actually service and restore turtle populations to scale across these regions. And you can imagine now, using meta-population dynamics and setting up networks of harvest populations, we can actually have a significant impact and start restoring populations by this method. And I know I'm going on for too long, but I quickly want to show you some of the issues, because we can't actually, obviously deal with foxes across the large scale. So we focus all our efforts onto these harvest populations for translocation. We can start dealing with, these threats that are actually occurring by focusing on these areas. Now, just quickly, some of the techniques we're actually looking to harvest turtle eggs and restore them. As you can imagine, we're doing some work in situ with an integrated approach. So we've got communities doing nest protection, going out just simple wire mesh and that sort of thing. We're actually created islands. So this here you can see in the middle is a mare of a local urban area here in Sydney, where the community created an island, essentially an island that is full of cat litter trays, and the turtles actually came up and nested. You can see the eggs here in these areas too. So we're now deploying these. We're actually creating design and nesting areas, you can see further down. So these are what we're trying to do, obviously, to beat foxes, is to essentially create areas where turtles can nest, communities can actually protect, and we can harvest hatchlings. Other areas we're working with, like I think, urban areas like golf courses, areas like parks and water treatment plants in urban areas, huge densities of turtles, a great resource, and often have fencing and a whole range of things that we can actually start using, creating these harvest populations, and the community can start doing it. We are looking at ex situ and implementing ex situ, particularly for working with this Australian Reptile Park for the endangered species, where we can't do a lot of this stuff, but also we heard about turtles in a classroom. We're doing the same thing. We're actually created these things called turtle pods, you can see down in the right-hand corner, where you can do 1,000 shipping containers where we can do 1,000 eggs at a time. But lastly, what I'm going to leave you at is the framework. And this is just quickly, what we need to do is essentially create a framework where people, individuals, schools, private owners, community groups, wetland managers can actually implement. You can see in the middle here, the range of things like nest protection to islands to nest relocation and head starting. That's appropriate for their area, and that's where the science comes in. But also the greater framework of how to get people to do it, and how we set up this network, really requires buy-in from conservation agencies, particularly, like I said, the Australian Reptile Park, but Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, that do this. This is their bread and butter. What they need is us as scientists to actually provide that information and do the research, so that then they can educate and help communities to do it in the right way. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll leave the video going here that we've sort of created, but I'm happy to take any questions. And don't forget 1millionturtles.com, so you can read more about it.
All right, Ricky, we have a couple of questions, and one was from earlier in your talk, and they were asking if the issue was due to just a rise in the salinity in the rivers near the mouths to the ocean, near the mouth of the river.
So it's, yeah, the groundwater. So obviously with agriculture, it certainly is. When you have droughts, you certainly will get, you know, those issues actually occurring throughout the Murray. It's certainly not just down near the mouth. It extends, you know, many hundred kilometres from the mouth further up. So yes, absolutely. So it extended. You know, the turtles are actually, the community groups there were actually really good. They took them in and tried to scrub them and do them, but we did lose tens of thousands in that event.
3 more questions. The second one is, how quickly do the tube worms grow on the turtle shell to the extent that it affects the turtle's health?
It's a hard one to know exactly, because largely when they were being seen, that was extensive. They're actually hauling themselves out really sick and injured. Like I said, I think, you know, a lot of stuff that happens with freshwater turtles is out of sight, out of mind. We have people, you know, who've lived in the area for 70 years when we're trapping, actually asking us, like, didn't even know freshwater turtles occurred in there. So we don't know exactly how long it takes from the start. Largely what we're seeing is the, you know, sick turtles hauling themselves out of the water.
Another viewer would like to know more about the floating island design and maybe get it, but also asks if there have been any issues with the surrounding water cooling down the temperature of that substrate, cooling down those eggs.
Okay, so we have several designs. We're working with floating island companies that, you know, extensive for, you know, really, yeah, islands that you could actually drive cars onto. And so we're looking to implement that. It was supposed to be this season, but COVID sort of, you know, it's likely to be next nesting season, which is November, essentially, for most freshwater turtles in Australia. No, we didn't have it. We didn't have any issues with that floating island. We actually, that was one built by the community. So essentially, we worked with them. They essentially, we just went to the local large hardware chain, and bought a huge amount of stuff to float. To a large extent, the nesting boxes are sitting out of the water, sitting quite high, so the turtles have to climb up. And we didn't have any issues of hatchability. We do have to look at, we're trialing some different substrates, obviously with rain and that sort of thing, that, you know, some of can get really quite boggy. So this season, we're actually trialing a whole range of different substrates and drainages but we, to a large extent, we launched that right at the end of nesting season. It was more of a proof of concept that we can get a community to build an island and actually have it float through, you know, storm seasons and that sort of thing. But so it was an added bonus to have, you know, a whole bunch of turtles actually nesting in there.
That's great. Another question, how can we convince different stakeholders to agree to support the program?
That's where communities and engaging the communities to actually do it. And we've had a lot of, what would I say, initial reluctance. I guess, you know, I guess conservatism from governments, you know, that we heard about, you know, sort of regulatory and that sort of thing. But, you know, essentially creating, and that's where the research and actually, you know, getting research permits and actually trialing things. They're happy to, you know, a lot of governments government agencies are really happy to have demos and trial things, and you have success, then you know you essentially get buy-in from them. We generally don't have much trouble getting people to be enthused by turtles. I think they are a taxa from around the world that people will buy into. And I think the other thing too is that, you know, that there hasn't been a real opportunity in Australia for conservation groups to actually really do hands-on conservation. It's largely been the domain of planting trees or those kind of things that is what we call, you know, active conservation. But now they actually want it. They've got a chance now to actually, you know, and particularly the other thing I haven't mentioned is engaging the amateur community, which have turtles that have come from the wild, and certainly a base that we can involve of them, and they have the expertise for breeding as well.
That's great. We've got one more question.
Yeah.
Did the 2019 wildfires have an impact on wild turtle populations, and were nests destroyed during those events?
In general, no. I think terrestrially they were okay, but we did see some die-offs and fish kills, but also turtle die-offs post fire. So we're working in those communities, largely because of the runoff. Oxygen levels became really, really low. Essentially all that ash and pH levels would certainly drop significantly, which affected certain species, particularly on the North Coast. So one of the communities we're working with is the Hunter River, which hasn't been classified as a subspecies yet, but one of the short necks that you can see on the right-hand side here is in the Hunter River. They were greatly affected. I have to say, probably we saw a lot of die-offs before the fires because of the drought. So we've had years of drought. We had years of drought leading up to that, and obviously a huge amount of wetlands and rivers drying up. That's when the turtles were affected across southeastern Australia.
Well, thank you, Ricky. That is all for questions, and we're going to shift on over to our next presenter, Patrick, and hear some more really, really interesting information.
Okay, good afternoon, morning, and evening, everyone, wherever you find yourselves in the world. I'm a bit of a wild card, not on the schedule, but kindly the TSA invited me to present work that I missed presenting last week. So with that, I'll present to you a carry-on a bit from what Ricky kindly discussed about subsidized predators, in this case, corvids as subsidized predators of freshwater turtles and tortoises globally. Subsidized predators can be animals that are native or introduced whose populations proliferate on account of human subsidies. These can include food, water, shelter, or essentially trickle downs, trophic cascades from release from predation pressure. When we think of subsidized predators, most of the time we're thinking about mid-sized mammalian predators, red foxes, raccoons from North America, opossums. Domestic dogs and cats are all excellent examples. But perhaps one group that has largely flown under the radar in this case are the corvid birds, and in particular the subfamily Corvinae. This includes the ravens and the crows. They tend to be highly mobile, occasionally nomadic, highly social, and if known for nothing else, being highly intelligent as well. What perhaps is really interesting and both concerning from a conservation perspective of these animals as subsidized predators is their ability to transmit information culturally, both among themselves and to their offspring, which can make them very proficient predators and scavengers. They're dietary and in general habitat generalists, which bodes really well for their ability to occupy human-dominated landscapes, urbanization, agriculture, and otherwise disturbed habitats. And also compared to a lot of subsidized predators that we are used to dealing with in conservation and wildlife management, corvids are very long-lived. In the wild, ravens typically surpass a decade, but are known to live 18 to 20 years. And I think a really important point to emphasize here as well is that universally, all of the the crow and raven species I'll be discussing in this talk are IUCN listed as least concern. And as I'll show you as well, they all have increasing, if not drastically increasing populations. This is in contrast to, of course, the organisms that we're most familiar with here, the chelonians. These are animals whose populations are highly sensitive to adult mortality. They have this bet hedging life strategy, which involves low annual reproductive effort, low and highly variable annual recruitment, very high adult survival, which as a consequence leads to long generation times. They grow slow, they recover very slowly, and most notably what has united many of us here today is that these animals are highly conservation dependent in many cases. I have included IUCN logos throughout this talk to show you about the particular chelonian species I'm discussing and where they fit on the conservation spectrum. And as you'll see, their status contrasts very sharply with that of their corvid predators in that many species are vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. So throughout this talk, my objectives here are to examine the regional population trends for both predatory corvid birds and chelonians. I'm presenting a number of novel case studies, and I've reviewed the literature about corvids as a threat to chelonians. And ultimately, I'm using this to evaluate our understanding about whether corvids are a justifiable threat, and then if so, discussing the management strategies that are relevant where they happen to threaten the persistence of the chelonian populations that we're concerned with. I'll start my studies here in North America because these are most familiar to me from my work in Ontario, Canada, and I'll take this globally here. I'll have in my presentation here contrasting slides in which I present the corvid population trend, followed by the case studies in which they're hunting chelonians and discuss the conservation implications of this. Okay, so throughout this bird conservation region of Eastern North America called the Boreal Hardwood Transition Zone, common raven populations have increased by 265% since the mid-1960s. This means that these birds have become incredibly abundant, as you can see from this graph here. They have a very high relative abundance. Likewise, through a very close and allied region throughout Eastern North America, the populations of common raven have undergone an absolutely astounding increase in abundance, in fact, up to 10,000%. But do take note of the scales here. They are still relatively uncommon, but much, much more common than they used to be. Those red dots on the map here relate to case studies that I'm about to discuss with regards to chelonians and mass predatory events. This here is the Western painted turtle, and the red dot is in northwestern Ontario on the north shore of Lake Superior. In the year 2000, at a nesting site along a set of railway tracks, 20 adult females were found killed during the nesting season. In the subsequent decade, there have been increasing reports of scattered mortality. And again, in 2017, an additional 20 adults were killed at a single nesting site. Direct observers have conveyed to me that raven predation now occurs quite often along linear corridors in human disturbed landscapes. This includes railroads, unpaved roads, and gravel pits, essentially the sorts of habitats that these birds are very capable of surveying and regularly do survey for easily accessible prey, including nesting female turtles. What I'd like to draw your attention to in the bottom right-hand corner here is a photo taken by a wildlife pathologist who investigated this case of these raven kills. And what you'll see is a large puncture in the leg pocket of these painted turtles. And that's something that will be a reoccurring theme throughout this talk. So we've gone from northwestern Ontario down into central Ontario for case studies 2 and 3. In 2012, we had the report of a total of 11 painted turtles killed, all again during the nesting season, and mostly, once again, the most sensitive demographic, reproductive females, along, once again, a disturbed human corridor where these birds are highly subsidized and becoming increasingly abundant. Case study 3 comes from Algonquin Provincial Park, a long-term study site for turtles here in Ontario. And once again, about 9 to 10 turtles killed in 2010 and 2011 by ravens throughout this area where they're increasing in abundance. What's quite notable is that this is a protected area. However, these mortality events occurred at a particularly disturbed area, a hydro cut and hydro right-of-way, which the birds frequent. Moving slightly more eastbound here into maritime Canada and the northeastern United States, we see very similar population trends in the common raven. Although not as drastic as those that I just presented, we are seeing increases of about 30% over the past 40 years. And these case studies that I'm about to show you are really interesting, I think, for their severity, despite what is a relatively modest increase in these subsidized predators at these locations. Relatively recently, biologist Michael Marchand published a short note in which 48 nesting female painted turtles and 1 adult male were killed at a single nesting site in a single year. This was along an unpaved clearing road. And once again, we see these injuries to the hind limb pocket, which are very characteristic of the predation tactics of these birds. Once again, this species still is of least concern and relatively common and abundant throughout the northeastern United States and Canada. And here's just those contrasting photos here. It's often very obscure how to identify the predatory tactics of birds, but a common strategy is to puncture the inguinal or the groin pocket of these females, flip them over and kill them when they're nesting, removing the eggs and their internal organs. Where this begins to shift to be of considerable conservation note is this example with wood turtles in the province of New Brunswick, Canada. Along an unpaved road between 2011 and 2012, 45 adults wood turtles were found killed, and subsequent observations confirm that this was the actions of both American crow and common raven. Among 3 additional monitored sites during this time, there have been recorded 57 additional mortalities. These have not been directly attributed to ravens as predators, although they are suspect. So here's the lay of the case studies right here in northeastern North America. I think it's notable that these locations are hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometers apart. And yet we're seeing both increasing population trends of these birds as well as these patchy, isolated mass mortality events. Perhaps another case study that doesn't need a great deal of introduction among those on this call is the case study of common ravens down in the southeastern or southwestern United States, particularly in California, and in particular as it affects the desert tortoise. Mean common raven abundance has increased by over 300% since 1966. And once again, this is highly facilitated by us providing food, water, and shelter subsidy to these birds. Here are some photos here, and this is where the case studies start to become much more drastic. These are photos provided by Peter Woodman from the late 1980s. And these are shells of juvenile desert tortoises recovered from underneath a single nest, a single raven nest during a single breeding season. In the photo shown here, there are about 140 tortoise shells of 190 that were eventually found. The gopher tortoise is vulnerable, but provisionally assessed as critically endangered. And the common raven is a major threat and has been known to be a major threat for the past 40 years. Here's a general timeline, and I don't expect you'll be able to review all of these in detail, but starting as early as 1977, there were elevated levels of juvenile mortality noted by common ravens, and as you can see, that would quickly climb to be of major conservation concern. In many cases, there are dozens to hundreds of juvenile tortoises being found in the vicinity of perch or nest sites of common ravens. Today, about 76% of desert tortoises are below viability. That is to say that in terms of long-term population viability, these are effectively ghost populations that are going extinct. These ravens are a huge issue, and efforts to control them have been largely unsuccessful or a bit underwhelming, at least in terms of the scale of the initiative. And this continues to happen today. But what's most concerning is that this issue is scaling up. Not only have juvenile tortoises been targeted for the past several decades, but attacks by common ravens have graduated to be on adult female tortoises in particular. As we know about the life history of these animals, if these females start to experience increased levels of mortality, there are massive implications for continued population decline. This is a scenario that should be taken extremely seriously, on top of the mounting number of other threats that the desert tortoise is experiencing. Jumping from North America to the Mediterranean, brown neck ravens as well as carrion crows, it's a very similar story in arid desert habitats. They've been highly subsidized in nesting habitat through infrastructure. So a number of species such as Testudo warneri, also known as Testudo klumeni, or not also known, but rather relatively recently redescribed new populations as new species, are critically endangered, and yet their populations are falling quickly in parts of Israel and perhaps also Egypt. I think particularly telling is the work of Perry and colleagues from the mid-1990s, in which over their 3-year survey period, carrion crow populations increased by 20-fold, whereas tortoise populations plummeted by 500-fold. Just as the case studies elsewhere from North America, the damages to shells and the identification of corvids as these primary subsidized predators is very much obvious and apparent. Recently published in Scientific Reports, Amelia Segura and colleagues wrote of 50% of the juvenile spur thigh tortoises they found in a protected area of Morocco were killed by nesting common ravens, which may be subsidized by small local communities. Suffice to say, these are patchy observations, but when likely scaled across the landscape, they have large conservation applications. In South Africa, this is probably the case studies most well studied and as analogous to the desert tortoise. Southern African Breeding Bird Atlas data suggests that there are significant increases in pied crows, especially among treeless habitats of the desert and the scrublands. This is especially true because these birds are being provisioned with nesting infrastructure where nesting is normally limited. They're able to take advantage of telephone poles, hydro towers, and so forth on which to lay their eggs. Over 50% of populations monitored in South Africa of the pied crow have increased, and 25% of monitored populations have increased greater than 100% within the past couple decades. In the Northern Cape, where Victor Loyer does a lot of his work with dwarf tortoises, for instance, in 2000 to 2004, pied crows were present in less than 5% of surveys. By 2012, they're present in 50% of surveys, approximately. These are birds that are increasing in abundance very, very quickly, once again, provisioned by people. And much like we see with the desert tortoise case studies, this is ramping up incredibly quickly, and it's particularly impacting a lot of the species of dwarf tortoises, for which both juveniles and adults are highly susceptible to mortality. Earliest observations of pied crows inducing mass mortality in tortoises starts as early as 1994. And as you can see, by the mid-2000s, we have very large-scale mass mortality events that are going on, including case studies as high as 475 juvenile tortoises found from clusters of raven or crow nests. This case study stands out in particular. It's published by Fincham and Lambrechts in 2014, where a single pair of pied crows that were nesting on an old windmill during the approximately 50-day nesting period over 2 years, they killed over 450 tortoises. In 2012, at least 160 were consumed. In 2013, 315 juvenile tortoises were eaten. As I've kind of alluded to, a lot of these events seem to be occurring in spatial isolation, but because these birds are so wide ranging and they cover so much ground while foraging, a single nest can have very, very far reaching impacts on these populations. As is the case with the desert tortoises, recruitment in many of these populations has been driven to zero, mainly because of subsidized predators, both mammal and bird. It's easy to see how many of these populations are only hanging on because the adults are not vulnerable, but the juveniles are being selectively removed, causing universal recruitment failures. Taking this full circle now, the final case study I'll present here is from Australia. Although abundance records for these ravens and crows are not yet published, long-term trend data is not available. Reports generally call the little raven and the Australia raven super abundant, widespread, and the IUCN recognizes them as increasing. Where regional data is available is on the outsides of Perth here in Western Australia, and that's where things get both really interesting and quite concerning. These animals, of course, are experiencing the same subsidies. These birds are experiencing the same subsidies as elsewhere in the world. And they're a compounding threat on top of red fox and a number of introduced predators. I think perhaps the most or the greatest reason for concern of corvids in Western Australia, where they've tripled in abundance in the past 20 years, is with the Western swamp turtle that's critically endangered. There are only 30 wild individuals known of the Western swamp turtle up until the late 1980s. Subsequent conservation efforts have begun to recover them, but the Australian raven maintains a major maintains its position as a major predator for these turtles. The ravens are known to take hatchlings and release juveniles. They'll regularly attack and maim adults. In other areas of Western Australia, some of the Longneck turtles are extremely vulnerable. They're regularly attacked while nesting. They're flipped over, and much like the painted turtle case studies from Eastern North America, the ravens kill the adult females while nesting and remove their eggs and viscera. I regret a bit that I've moved through this so quickly because there's a lot of nitty-gritty details to share with you, but the review paper with all this is forthcoming. I think what stood out to me in undertaking this review is that a lot of commonalities emerged that are worth discussing. These patterns that I've shared with you here are geographically widespread, but they're very, very patchy. They appear to be occurring at a very low frequency when we look across landscape levels, but where these mortality events happen, they can be extremely severe. And as we know of turtle life history, these animals cannot take such acute pressures, never mind such chronic pressures. A lot of these mass mortality or hyperpredation events are associated with nesting corvids. So during reproduction, there's obviously a high demand for food, and foraging adults will go to great lengths, seemingly, to get turtles. This hyperpredation is very much facilitated by linear corridors. These birds, being so intelligent, use roads, railways, electrical and telecommunications infrastructure to cruise for prey. And they're highly subsidized by roadkill, which brings them to roadsides, often where turtles are found nesting. Yeah, I mean, these case studies are happening. It is purely correlational, but I think there is a reason to think that there is causation to this. With increasing corvid population sizes, we are seeing these elevated hyperpredation or mass mortality events of turtles and tortoises. There are some serious management implications that need to be discussed for this underappreciated threat. We need high quality data on both predator and prey populations, but I would sincerely urge those in a position of conservation and management that delaying should not be used as justification. That is, delaying in data collection should not be used as justification for taking action. The most obvious thing that needs to be done is to reduce access to subsidies for these birds. Subsidies increase survival and they increase reproduction. So we need better waste management systems, or we need to deter birds from subsidies. That is to say, We need to put deterrence on infrastructure that can be used to subsidize nesting and the reproduction. We need to have better waste management, such as using closed-top garbage bins or having deterrence at dump sites that otherwise increase these bird populations to such high levels. Recent work by Tim Shields and company for desert tortoises down in the American Southwest has shown that they can use drones and conduct egg oiling to assist with reproductive interference. Things like nest destruction could probably be productive for curbing the reproduction of these birds, but it's a lot of work and it's really only a band-aid solution. Aversion training is being used to help protect desert tortoise populations in the southwestern United States, as well as with the geometric tortoises down in South Africa. This involves things such as using bird deterrence, using laser lights, loud sounds to scare birds away from sites where tortoises are present, and also using decoy turtles with poison or with noxious compounds that induce the birds to vomit. The premise behind this is actually that a live bird is much more valuable than a dead one, and that is because these birds learn from each other and are so gregarious. If you can teach one bird to avoid turtle prey, it can quickly spread throughout the population. Of course, if you opt to kill that bird, you've only knocked one out of the population. The last, and I should emphasize, very last management strategy that should be implemented should be lethal control. There are a number of studies in both avian and turtle nest predation that show that lethal control is not an effective strategy. It's only a band-aid once again. Reducing access to subsidies, which involves changing human behavior, is the single most important management strategy. All others are just stepwise, band-aid, and generally ineffective solutions, at least on the long term. So I wanted to close with this, which is an extract from the paper that's in review, and it's this. Even if current evidence suggests that instances of turtle population overexploitation by corvids are relatively spatially isolated, the severity and the collective impact of these events should not be discounted. The suite of factors involved in this conservation challenge, namely the variability of the slow life histories of turtles, the additive mortality of subsidized predators, in this case corvids, but also a lot of subsidized mammals, the potential spread of specialized predatory behavior among these highly social birds, and the cumulative risk of local extinctions, especially in these species of turtles and tortoises that are already severely imperiled, amounts to a perfect storm of threat. It certainly shouldn't be taken as alarmist, but what we already know from these bird populations is that they are increasing incredibly rapidly, and that case studies of the desert tortoises in the United States, turtles, freshwater turtles in southwestern Australia, and tortoises in South Africa show that this is a threat that's not only increasing, but it's likely increasing in geographic breadth, but probably increasing in severity as well. I'd be happy to take any questions, and as I understand, if you have rolled in here through the online chat, I may not have too much time, but I will take a crack at a few of these questions. Question one I see, yeah, how widespread do you think raven attack is throughout the range of the various species discussed? I think I'd emphasize that by simply saying that our current evidence suggests that spatially it's very patchy, but a lot of the case studies that I assembled were not from the peer-reviewed literature. These came from speaking with people as diverse as farmers, to local wildlife biologists, to local landowners. So I think the really important point here being is that this is very much under-evaluated as a threat. We have no idea how spatially widespread this is in most case studies. And so it requires a lot more eyes on the ground. I think that's a really important lesson to take away. What sources of food and water are humans giving to these birds? Well, water mostly comes in the form of things like agricultural ponds, troughs for livestock in agricultural settings. Heck, even fountains in things like urban areas. In terms of food, these birds are habitat and dietary generalists. So everything from agricultural crops, which they're regularly known to be pests of, to fast food items that are tossed in a dumpster in urban centers, to litter that people throw on the side of the road while they are driving. So really any sources of food are suitable. Many of these animals are carnivorous, the birds, sorry, are carnivorous or scavengers, but they will readily take vegetative matter and seeds and so forth as well. So as dietary generalists, indeed, they'll feed on a lot of different things. Another question, how do seagulls compare to corvids in terms of predation threat? Although I particularly focused on corvids, gulls would be an excellent one to investigate further. There is a really interesting case study from an area called Dassen Island, South Africa, in which the gull species present there is a predator of ungulate tortoises. It seems like a much more spatially explicit, or rather spatially limited scenario. I'm not aware of any mass mortality events from gulls caused to freshwater turtles and tortoises, but there are some recorded events in the literature from other generalist species, such as magpies, blackbirds, and red-winged blackbirds in particular in North America. Why aren't crow predators increasing since there are so many crows now? Well, that's a really great question. A lot of corvids can be extremely territorial. So for instance, why aren't raptors increasing on account of, say, corvid prey? Well, a lot of ravens, for example, are highly territorial. In fact, they harass and displace a lot of raptors off of nests. So corvids really come to dominate in a lot of ways as predator scavengers. They're just very assertive animals and are able to capitalize on a lot of, a lot of opportunity. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to all questions, but thanks very much to everyone. I'll keep an eye on the chat on the YouTube page. Good luck to the rest of the presenters, and thank you to the TSA.
Good morning. My name is Jacob Marlin. I'm the Executive Director of the Belize Foundation for Research and Environmental Education here in Belize. I'd like to first thank the Turtle Survival Alliance for hosting and putting together this great conference in this difficult time. It's a tremendous resource for people all over the world, so I'm very happy to be a part of it. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about the conservation actions leading up to and including the first rewilding or reintroduction of Dermatemes maui, also called the Central American river turtle, or in Belize, it's called the Hickey, in the country of Belize. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background on the species. The Central American river turtle is the lone surviving member of an ancient lineage of turtles dating back almost 65 million years. It is the only living species in the family Dermatemidae. So that makes this one of the most endangered turtle families in the world. The geographic distribution of Dermatemes is relatively restricted. It's found in the coastal lowlands of southern Mexico, a small portion of northern Guatemala, and portions of Belize. Currently, it is listed by the IUCN as critically endangered, meaning it's nearing extinction. The cause of its decline throughout its range is almost exclusively for human over harvesting for human consumption. It is traditionally a diet that's been used, particularly in Belize, but other countries as well. It's a highly prized meat, and so it's collected by free diving, by using nets, harpoons, a variety of ways. I'd also mention that even though the species is critically endangered in Belize, the laws do allow for sustainable harvest. There's a closed season, there's restricted areas that you cannot harvest Hickey, but they do have laws that allow for only personal consumption. There's no commercial activities allowed, no selling or purchasing of the species. Very briefly, I'll try to run through these things that we do know about Hickey. This is a very large, fully aquatic turtle. They can get up to almost 50 pounds. They have relatively long lifespans, at least 45 years or more. They inhabit deep freshwater rivers, lagoons, tributaries, and other water bodies. They appear to be completely herbivorous throughout their entire life. They are primarily nocturnal, though they are somewhat active during the day. This is a species that does not bask. You will never see one of these species, one of these turtles basking on a log or on the bank, never. They tend to bury themselves in the bottom of these water bodies, often in debris or in cut banks, leaf packs, relatively hard to find. As adults, they are sexually dimorphic by color, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. They obtain their oxygen both from regular through their nasal cavity, but also they have a gill-like structure in their gular area that allows them to extract oxygen underwater, so they can stay underwater for very long periods of time. They also nest below the surface of the water, which is very unusual, which I'll get into a little bit later. And these shallow nests are subject to all types of predation and natural disturbance since they're right on the riverbanks. They lay usually 1 or 2 clutches of eggs per year. Mean clutch size is around 11 eggs or so. And these eggs undergo an embryonic diapause or delayed development. And their incubation periods can be up to 300 days. The temperature affects their sex, so TSD, they have temperature sex determination. And we are beginning to understand that sexual maturity takes about 15 to 17 years to reach sexual maturity. The easiest way to determine the different sexes is when they're adults. On the left, you have an adult male, on the right, an adult female. When they're smaller, they really look almost identical. Today, I'm speaking to you from Belize Foundation for Research and Mountain Education, Be Free in southern Belize, the Maya Mountains. And 10 years ago, TSA, Rick Hudson, contacted us down here in Belize to determine what we knew about the status of the species and sort of explore the conservation opportunities. They wanted to get involved in Dermatemi's conservation in the region. So Rick Hudson came down along with some others, and after a series of meetings, meeting key stakeholders, government officials, a countrywide survey was conducted in 2010, and then a national workshop took place, and real momentum started to unfold in this country. As part of the partnership, or as part of the conservation actions, we determined that there would be a benefit of having a captive component for the program, to both for a number of reasons. One, to create an assurance colony as a hedge against extinction, and also to investigate the feasibility of captive breeding for a potential Head Start release and reintroduction program, as well, and most also very importantly, to conduct research on the species reproduction, reproductive biology and ecology. Not that much has been done. There's been some great work done in Mexico primarily, but not much work has been done at that time. So, I'm sorry, so we, 2011, TSA and BFREE began a collaboration to create the Hickey Conservation Research Center to undertake these activities. And 10 years later, what we have is a facility that has 2 large breeding ponds, a rearing pond for hatchlings, floating islands, solar powered, freshwater, perimeter fence, and all the infrastructure necessary for this facility. In fact, it's such a lovely place that we get break-ins frequently, whether that's Morland's crocodiles or in this case, at Trichemies. So it's really become a wildlife hotspot. The breeding stock for the center was acquired primarily through confiscations provided by the Belize Fisheries Department, primarily over the years 2013 and 2014. So we currently have about 45 adults, a few of them are sub-adults, and the sex ratio is relatively even, a little bit more females to males. Dermatemes is considered a strictly herbivorous species. And so at our remote location, we have developed a system for providing a natural diet by both harvesting wild plants and fruits, as well as propagating some of their diet, in particular grasses. So they're fed a combination of different vegetation, mostly of the genus Inga and Ficus, Cecropia, and then the paspalum grass. We also feed them a variety of other herbaceous materials. At the center, we've had some pretty good success with nesting over the years, which I'll get into. What's so interesting is that we've had to develop the nesting areas in such a way that these turtles would exhibit natural nesting behavior. Because they lay their eggs under the surface of the water in flooded cavities in muck and mud, it's been an interesting challenge to create that for them, but we've done it pretty successfully. So over the last 6 nesting seasons, you can see here on the left the numbers of clutches of eggs per year from 1 up to this year, 2020, well, end of 19 and 2020, we had 19 clutches. And in total, we've had about 693 eggs deposited. We believe about 20 of these females are reproducing every year at this point. And we've had very good, pretty high fertility rate. Every so often we get a clutch without any fertility at all. But usually it's very high fertility, and our hatch success rate is also we're very happy with. In 2020, of the 208 eggs, 190 were fertile and 184 of them hatched. So we're doing pretty well in that regard. In addition to the work at the center, which is all part of sort of a fundamental conservation action, we also conduct a lot of other activities associated with the species. So it's not just a breeding center in terms of what we do. One of them is biannual health checks, which we've been doing for 5-6 years now, where we collect all of the turtles at the center. Every single one usually takes about 3 days. And we work with both vets that come internationally as well as local veterinarian. And this has been tremendously important. We take ultrasound images of all the females and sometimes even the males to look at the fertility and the status of their reproductive state, and use X-ray machines and take all the metamorphic data that you would assume one would take to, and this has allowed us to not only keep track of the health and deal with any potential disease issues that may crop up, but it's also allowed us over time with both these individuals as well as the hatchlings to determine age at sexual maturity. So this is a very important part of what we do every year. We also are very active in an outreach and education campaign that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years. We helped establish October as National Hickey Awareness Month, and October 17th is National Hickey Awareness Day. We worked with tons of schools and thousands of students throughout the country, and lots of local partners, which has been really critical to our outreach and education campaigns. We also, along with TSA, developed a short documentary film, Hope for Blease's Hickey, which launched the educational campaign 3 years ago and is still played regularly. This is a very important part of what we do. In terms of moving towards the reintroduction and rewilding activities, last year was a transformational year because in 2019, largely because of our constant advocacy and our outreach and educational programming and working with partners both locally and internationally, the government of Belize reached out to ask if we would be interested in doing a survey in a particular part of the country to determine, try to get a population estimate, which really there are no adequate, well-conceived population estimate studies so far on the species. So the work last year was fundamental. We were able to acquire a lot of field equipment through this funding, but also equally as importantly, we identified partners to help with these efforts. So Dr. Day Ligon, Denise Thompson, Don McKnight, Ethan Hollander from MSU's Turtle Lab came down for a period of time and worked with our staff at the Hickey Conservation Research Center, Jaron and Tom. We worked with local partners and we were able to conduct some field work. The important part of that field work also allowed us to identify release sites. And before that, we really didn't have a clear indication of where possible useful release sites could take place. So this year, we began our first rewilding efforts. This is a collaboration between Be Free, the Turtle Survival Alliance, Government of Belize, Belize Wildlife Referral Clinic, providing the veterinary assistance, and Day and Denise and his team at an organization called Beetle, the Belize Turtle Ecology Lab, which is now a newly formed turtle conservation organization within Belize. So we all determined to conduct 2 experiments concurrently. One looking at early life stage growth, a comparison of putting hatchlings in different treatments, and then later, 6 weeks later, and possibly at another time, recapturing them all in these different treatments and looking at survivorship, growth, health, etc. And at the same time, using those same animals as part of a long-term mark release recapture effort, because most of these turtles are released in areas that we are all now working in the field, led primarily by Day, Denise, and the Beetle team. So all of the turtles were weighed and measured on the day of release. We're talking about 100 and maybe I think I have the number in a minute, but a lot of turtles. They were all notched and pit tagged, and they were released in these different treatments. The first location is a closed system. During flooding events, it probably does not connect to other aquatic systems. And here we released 92 hatchlings. This is a site that we regularly research. Another site was a closed system where the species is not present, but does have other species of turtles and we think has all the attributes of good Hickey habitat. We thought we'd release some animals there just to look at the feasibility of possibly starting populations in new areas, because currently where Hickey are found, they're under such intense harvesting and threat that some of these areas may not be suitable for reintroductions or suitable for long-term survivorship of reintroduced animals. So this is part of our experiment. The third site was an open system within a wildlife sanctuary where there's a number of communities present. And just a couple of weeks ago, we released 12 hatchlings there. I really enjoyed Emily Wilder's talk a little while ago about their education work and their reintroduction work, working with local schools. We did integrate with the local kids from the community at this location and got community members involved, and each of those single hatchlings were released by, there happened to be 12 kids and 12 turtles, so it worked out perfectly. And in the bottom right-hand picture, you can see a Belize government fisheries official in the green shirt, also helping to release a turtle. The fisheries department were tremendous partners in these efforts, and even came during the time of COVID to this remote village to assist. The two other locations where hatchlings were also released are part of sort of this early life stage growth experiment. 20 were released in our rearing pond at Be Free as a semi-wild habitat. Obviously it's captive, but it's relatively natural. And then 20 were also kept back in our lab and are going to be raised indoors to look at their comparative growth and health over time. All of these actions and many more have played an important role in our efforts, and certainly in the rewilding parts. But I would just want to emphasize probably our most important conservation actions, which I have not mentioned much, which are actually things like investing and identifying and investing in people. The staff here, the interns that have worked here, are critical to the work that we've done. And building and investing in relationships and partners, both local and international, are key to any of these activities. Our unrelenting advocacy, I think, played a really important role in having the government come to us to ask us to help with Hickey research and conservation last year, which was critical to leading to this first rewilding efforts. And giving recognition to key stakeholders and partners is super important. So in a nutshell, investing in people and getting people invested has been a continuous theme throughout all of the slides I just laid out and everything we do. So what's next? We're working on developing a integrated conservation management and recovery plan for the species, along with lots of other key stakeholders. Unfortunately, that has been put on hold because of COVID, but we hope to get back to it very soon. And throughout that, of course, many activities would take place. We're going to continue our Head Start and Release rewilding programs. This is just the very, very beginning. It's all happened in the last couple of weeks. We're going to continue to advocate for the establishment of protected areas, specifically for dermatomes. We're advocating for the species to become the national reptile of Belize, and we're also going to be advocating for some revised regulations that can help reduce adult mortality and keep the species in healthy breeding populations for many years to come. So this is Thomas Popp. He's one of the most important people throughout this project. When I talked about investing in people, none of these activities would have been as successful without Tom. He's the manager at the HCRC. And I just want to finally make some acknowledgements before I take any questions. Turtle Survival Alliance has been a critical partner over the last 10 years, both as a funder and for technical and moral support. Belize Fisheries Department's been key and critical as part of our programming. I also want to mention some of the funders that have made our rewilding efforts possible. Shout out to Zoo New England for providing critical field equipment and supplies. Oklahoma City Zoo, also critical field equipment and supplies. Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens, they've continued to support our health checks and provided veterinary support and other types of support. Santa Fe Teaching Zoo, College for providing funding for our outreach and education programs, and others. And before I just take any last questions, I also just want to thank Dr. Isabel from the Belize Wildlife Referral Clinic for providing excellent in-country veterinary support, as well as Dr. Shane Boylan and Dr. Elliot Jacobson and others for providing continuous veterinary support and funding their own ways down here and just being incredibly supportive. I also want to a special shout out to Day Ligon and Denise Thompson and Donnie McKnight for partnering with us in country for our release efforts and becoming tremendous partners. And last but not least, to Heather Barrett and Tyler Sandville for spearheading our educational program so successfully over these years. And finally, I just would like to recommend to everyone to follow what's on this slide and donate to the Turtle Survival Alliance. I know, like so many organizations, they're having a tough time because of COVID. And so I encourage you all to donate to them today. Okay, so I'm just going to look at chats here real quick, if I can find them. Oh, crap.
Jacob, your first question is, how do you spot the nests when you're looking for the nests?
Thanks, David. I think I need some help. That's Tom Pop's incredible observational skills. The turtles at the center tend to come up during the night. And it's just, don't forget, this is usually during rainy season. So it's raining all the time, but they do test holes. They'll just dig a little small hole right on the edge of the bank, or even, in the water. So Tom looks for sometimes little claw prints if he's lucky enough to catch that, but he's also just feeling underneath the banks, along the edges. And we also know roughly the period of time, but we've had nests deposited as early as October and as late as April. So it's a pretty wide window, but it's both observation and literally manually feeling for nest cavities under the water in the bud banks.
Second question is, how many hours do these turtles spend eating, being herbivores? Do you have any idea?
No, that's a great question. We haven't done any studies to look at sort of percentage of the day, but they remind me of a cross between a fish and a cow. They're basically grazing, pretty much. I don't know about all of it. I can't say all the time, but they're grazers. They're constantly nibbling on things and grazing. Great question. I don't have the answer.
To follow up with, how or why do you think these aquatic species became totally herbivorous?
Another great question. There's been some interesting theories about the dinosaur extinction era. When the dinosaurs, the likely cause of the extinction of dinosaurs, where this family of turtles was around. There's been some theories that with the meteor and the massive explosion that took place and the loss of sunlight and the decaying vegetation and the loss of species, that this species of turtle, or its closest living relative, its ancestor, did quite well in that environment and probably just ate tons of vegetation, aquatic vegetation and rotting vegetation. It didn't need the sunlight, it doesn't bask. Maybe during that period of time, over hundreds of thousands of years, or I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I can't say, but maybe during that period that could have had an influence. But it's an interesting question. I would, the diet studies that have been done by Paul Moll and John Polisar, and possibly others, there are some hints of non-herbaceous material in their diet, but it's like little snail shells or bits of insects, which we all, I think, believe that are probably just bycatch while they're eating these this vegetation. But it's another great question. I wish I could provide more.
All right, the next one is, do you think that underwater diapause is obligatory, or can you collect and incubate those eggs immediately? And are the hatchlings sexually dimorphic, or do those differences develop over time?
Great question. So we've done quite a bit of experimentation with incubation. We haven't had the ability to keep, we almost always collect the eggs as soon as we find them. And we put them in the lab in incubation containers, and keep them in moist, but relatively dry substrate, just like incubating most reptile eggs. because the natural temperatures of Belize cool down during the winter months, November, December, January, the eggs also cool down. And during those periods, they're definitely going through an embryonic diapause. And they really don't start to develop until the temperatures warm up, sometimes as late as February or March. And then they usually hatch out in June. So we haven't been able to collect eggs and put them at, let's say, I don't know, 29C from day one. We've tried to do that a few times, but not that much success because of power limitations here, because we're totally off the grid with solar. But I don't know. It's a great question. What I can tell you is we've done some experiments where we've taken a portion of a clutch of eggs and submerged them in water. One time, I think 8 feet in a well for 3 months. And after removing those eggs, they were still viable. We've done it for 15 days, 30 days, 45 days. Also submerged in shallow amounts of water, and they've all, or most of them have been viable and hatched and are perfectly healthy. So I don't know if it's obligatory. It's a great question. Another experiment that needs to happen. In terms of sexual dimorphism, no. At birth, they all look the same. They don't become dimorphic in terms of color or anything else until they reach adult maturity.
And for our last question, do you guys have a volunteer program?
We do. In fact, volunteers have played a super important part of all of the work we do, including the work with Hickey. So yeah, you can go to our website, befreebz.org, and you can contact us and see. In fact, I think it's out there on Facebook. Right now, good luck because, airports closed. We've been locked down here since January. But one day the world will become a better place, and we'd love to have people volunteer. So please feel free to contact us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jacob. It's always a pleasure to hear about this enigmatic species. Up next, we have Parabologist Ray, and I'm gonna see if we can get started here. Thanks. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties on our next presenter from India. Give us a couple of minutes and we'll see if we can get those worked out. Everybody sit tight.
Right now, am I audible?
There you are. I think the headphones were the trick. Thanks.
Oh, right now I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, David, for helping me out in sorting out these technical issues. I'm very much sorry to all the audiences who are attending this program. So I'm sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, a very good morning and hello to everyone who is whoever is attending this program. So myself, Dr. Parimal Chandra Ray. So I am presenting my work from India, and I am the project coordinator of TSA India. Especially I'm working in the northeastern part of Assam, Northeast India. And I'm presenting this work along with my co-author, Dr. Raghavendra Sharma, who is a veterinary officer in TSA India. And we are going to present this work on the freshwater turtle diversity in Nakshankar Temple Pond of Assam, India, and in initiative for recommending and conservation action plan. And I'm happy to be a part of this whole presentation, which has been conducted first time ever on a virtual platform. So before starting my whole work, so I would like to acknowledge the Forest Department of Assam, especially the Sonitpur Vishwanath Charali, Kaziranga Forest Department, Kaziranga National Park, and the temple authorities, Nakshankar Temple, WCS India, Wildlife Conservation Society, Wildlife Trust of India, along with all the support from Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. And I also would like to acknowledge all the volunteers and the local persons who had wholeheartedly helped us in this work. So as I had said that this is the whole work is on the temple turtles. So there's always a thing like why the turtles are kept in Indian temples. So the basic thing that we have found that almost there are few mythological significance which are associated with the turtles in the Indian temples. And also they can sometimes bring fortune and wealth to the devotees and whoever worship these turtles. And they also have a significance of endurance in their life. As I said that they have a mythological significance. So for that, there is one saying of that turtles are considered as acupara. So in Hinduism, acupara is a kind of tortoises who come in the world and who is carrying the whole world on his back. And if you have heard about in the Sriparna's talk, so she had like told about the Kurma avatar, which is also a platform where this app has been used. So I will not go into this Kurma avatar thing. So according to this whole mythological significance, it is keeping the turtles in the temple ponds. So also the temple ponds, whichever the turtles are present there, they are being donated by all the devotees. And as I said, like turtles are being worshipped and they are also being culturally being protected. But the saddest part is that they are not living in a healthy condition. Okay, so this is a time to take the call upon this, why we need to save the turtles in the temple ponds. So altogether in Assam, we have a total of 29 documented ponds across the Brahmaputra river landscape, and which houses almost different kinds of like endangered species, including the black soft-shell turtle, Nilsonia nigricans. And the problems that are associated with the turtles in the temple ponds are that they are facing some problems with the malnutrition and sepsis. And because of the external feeding by devotees, again the water quality is getting degraded, and the water pollution is also a problem with right there. And as I said, the time to time the devotees donate the turtles, so it's also creating a problem in the overcrowding in the temple ponds. And when there is overcrowding and there is a disturbance, then again they are having problems with the lack of basking site and even the lack of nesting site. So this is a similar kind of problem that is altogether the temples in the Assam are facing. So we took intervention in one of the ponds, so which name is Nakshankar Temple and is situated in the Vishwanath district on the northern bank of the Brahmaputra. So in the month of like February, we have received a crisis call from the Nakshankar Temple committee about the turtle health problem with the swelling, then edema is there, then eye swelling and abrasion over the turtles more body. So over here in this temple, we are like working since 2017, and we are trying to build the rapport with this temple committee, because it's all about like changing the mindset of the committee, because turtle conservation is not a small thing to like do on a one go. We need a gradual process of follow up and constant attachments. So this intervention, we have received this call from the temple only. So accordingly, we have thought of like what kind of interventions that we can uh, take up. So we come up with three major interventions. First was like to helping the turtles in the temples to check their healthy conditions according to follow the code of conduct of animal welfare committee. We also thought of like evacuating the turtles from the pond which are polluted, and check and do some prior health checkups, and also do some post-stress monitoring. Also, as I said, like we are working with these temples from a quite long time. So we are in a process of preparing some long-term conservation action plan for temple turtles. So with keeping with all these ideas, we had taken some approaches to like how we can approach. So for at the very uh, first day, we just went to the temple and we have asked all the stakeholders to just come up and have a meeting with them. So how can we can initiate this exercise and work on these interventions. So after these interventions, we have like come up with the idea that we need to clean the whole pond, and we have to drain out the polluted water, so that we can revive the whole habitat of the pond for the turtles. So I will just right now I will show how the things we have like taken up there. So I will just go into show you the bird eye view of Nagshankar temple. As you can see, like here there are 1, 2, 3, and 4 places I have highlighted. So the first one was the pond which was the original pond, for which we have drained out. Okay, and the second one was the additional pond, and both the ponds have almost, if I calculate the area, then it's almost 1 hectare. Like, and the third part, as you can see, the third area, which that area we have kept as a temporary treatment area, because we were about to like shift the turtles from that old original pond to the additional pond. So in between there were a lot of problems we have seen morphologically. Then the fourth one was like to make a temporary shift over right here. So this is how we have done. Like in the first, like in the original pond, we had like drain out the water of the pond, and these are the scenario of the drain out the original pond and the additional pond. So the number one pond we have drained out, and in the third, like in the treatment area, we had taken up the medical treatment of the turtles. And in the fourth, like temporary makeshift, we had tried to dig out some of the small ponds, so that we can keep any turtle if needed for any medical attention. So after making all this kind of preparation, so we progress with the evacuation exercise. So in the evacuation exercise, what we have done, we have taken the help of all those turtle poachers and local fishermen, because they are the expert in like in handling the turtles. Because in a general way, no layman people can go and just handle those animals. So in this opportunity, what we have learned that the ex-turtle poachers have a lot of ideas, like to take out the turtles which were we have seen deep inside the mud. So but the whole beauty was that all these turtle poachers have helped us a lot. Along with that, we have also taken the help of a lot of volunteers from different universities and different NGOs also. After this, what we have done, we had like treated the animals, and our veterinary team and also the forest department team had helped in that. And accordingly, we have again shifted the turtles to the this additional pond. And somewhere we have seen that the turtles were by themselves, they were going to the next pond. And after the whole this process, after the evacuation and shifting of the turtles was done, we have asked the temple to like dig up the whole temple pond, so that all the polluted water and the this all the plastic materials and whatever the waste is was present in the bottom of the pond can be cleaned up. After this whole exercise, we waited for some time so that we can recharge and refill the pond water with the borewell and even with the rainwater. So on the right side, you can see that with the rainwater, it has recharged, we have refilled the whole pond. So gradually, what we have done, we had tried to do some post monitoring stress level and the health improvement, whether the animals were improving or not after the intervention of our team and along with all the stakeholders. So what we have found during our treatment at that time, we have found one turtle have a very severe head injury because the pond is so small and there's always a competition and this thing is going on. But now on the right side, you can see that now it's just last month we have taken the photograph of the same individual. Now it's totally healed up. So it's a good sign that the animals are coping up, and at least our intervention is providing some good benefit to this animal. And now the original pond that we have like cleaned up and excavated has been like totally looking very good actually. And now also there we have added some substrate for basking. So now the hard shells are also like, and even though like soft shells are like basking near all those ponds like banks. So altogether, what we have learned through this exercise, since it started in the February and still we are in progressing mode, and we are in constant touch with the temple. We have learned that we can address the husbandry issues of the turtles in the temple pond only if we can do it in collaborative way. We have also done some species level assessment, which confirmed that there are 10 species of turtles. So we have found 5 species of soft shell turtle, and we have found 5 species of hard shell turtle. Among the soft shell, we have 3 species of Nilsonia we have found: Nilsonia nigricans, hurum, and Nilsonia gigantica. So, and for the rest of the hard shells, they are very hardy actually. So all these animals were brought by the devotees because they have a mythological value. And as I said, like we have handled and shifted a lot of animals. So when somebody visit these temples, they will see the temple and the pond, and they will just estimate like there might be high number of turtles in this pond. But as per the ocular observation, it is not true. So what we have found, like we can estimate around 250 plus individuals in these 2 ponds, which is of only 1 hectare of size. And altogether we have handled 124 individuals, live individuals, which have like almost maximum to maximum we have found like around 30 or 25 kg of weight of turtles. Like we have also learned that through this exercise, what we could achieve, we can check the mortality and we can address the health issue. But it has to be it has to be like taken up after 2-3 years, so that we can revive the temple ponds like quality actually, or even the habitat. At a species level assessment, as I said, like we have got 10 species, the higher number of individuals that we have found for altogether for the Nilsonia species. And there is one interesting facts that we came up, like we have also addressed the captive cohort, how many captive cohorts are there. And there are a lot of problems we have came across during this whole exercise, that we lacked some temporary makeshift facility while we were segregating the animals for treatment, and after shifting them. And as you can see, like there is a Chitra indica is there. So as we know that this species always lives in the free flowing water, and now in this case they are living in this closed system. So they are so sensitive species, but it shows that they are very also highly adaptable to the extreme conditions. So this from this whole thing, like we got to know that as we all know that all the turtles come from the donations. And the best part is that there is a good sign that nobody kills the turtle because they have a mythological value, and all the turtles who are present in this temple have been either donated or like have been taken from the nearby area, so that they keep it right here. So thoroughly, like after going through this exercise, what we have learned, that we can achieve something good out of this exercise, and we can replicate this kind of exercise in other temples also. So as I said, like there was an objective of like planning for a conservation action plan. So way forward, we are thinking of improving the whole husbandry of the temple. But due to the COVID pandemic, we could not achieve this in a gradual process, but we have laid down all our draft plans, like what we will going to do. And we are in constant touch with the temple committee, and we are time to time we are organizing a lot of like awareness programs and training programs for them. So our main agenda will be the same, like to create more awareness by the help of the school students, teachers also. We are also emphasizing the temples to provide some fish, because as I said, the devotees comes there and they are providing them unhealthy food. So instead of providing the unhealthy food, so how the people's mindset can be changed so that they can more often, whenever the devotees come, they can provide fish to the temple turtles. And in the process, as I said, that there are a lot of challenges we have faced. So we have discussed and have kept some blueprints to in coming years, like so that we can make some donation come quarantine tanks. So the purpose of making donation come quarantine tank is to like check the turtles donation in the temple, so that accordingly we can collaborate with the forest department to release this donated turtles in the wild, and for making some hatcheries and nursery for the hatchlings, because turtles do nest there. So but there is no lot of problems, as I said it, for with the basking and the nesting side. And even like there is the water quality is a main problem, because they don't have a filtration process. So we are thinking like if in the coming time we can make some filtration process. And there is one more problem is there, the turtles can be protected and can be provide a better place to like do behavioral activities, but due to there is no prohibition zone for the devotees. So we have asked the temple committee to come up with new things, like so that where we can also collaborate to help them in making some prohibition zones, so that the turtle can behave very naturally. And the long process, as I said, like we want to stop donation of the turtles. Instead, we should release them. But for that, it's a gradual process. So we are in process, so that we can sometime we can come up, we can be a successful like agency in implementing this thing. And with the final note, like we, as I said, like we are into the process of making a conservation breeding program here, and I'm happy to share that in this year during the COVID pandemic, all the stakeholders, even the local administration and district admission has helped us in achieving this milestone. So in April, after during the post stress monitoring, what we have found that Ninsolian aggregants, they have nested very quite in the banks of the pond. And in April, we have collected the eggs and we have incubated the eggs in the temple premises it only. And in the month of July, we have successfully received 27 hatchlings out of them. So all these are like altogether, it's a good sign, because it only happened because the temple committee are providing the space, the commitment, and they are also providing the positive note, so that how we can progress with this temple turtle conservation program. So I have a video for all the whole of the exercise, which I have like shared in this my presentation. So if you all can like go to this turtle survival YouTube channel, so there you can find this YouTube link, and you can watch this right now or after the presentation, so that you can have a better view of how this whole process and whole exercise has been conducted. And we also want to replicate this kind of whole exercise, so that we can in other temples we can revive the whole temple turtles population, and also like to make a standard protocol for like keeping turtles there. If not, at least we can initiate the conservation breeding program. So literally, but our TSA India has a vision like not to keep turtles anywhere in any temple, but it's a gradual process. We have to follow up the things, and we have to come up with good ideas. So thank you very much for patience learning and giving me this opportunity. And I'm very much thankful to David for hosting this program. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. First is there any evidence that there has been interbreeding or hybridization amongst turtles in the temple ponds?
Okay, as far as like regarding this interbreeding hybrids, there has not been so many studies has been conducted. As I said, like this was the first time when somebody, or like as I said, like TSA has been invited by the temples to to see the turtles, how many number of turtles and how the breeding cohorts are there. So it's we were amazed like to see the turtles like in the hardy turtles like the Chitra indica right there, because all the turtles which are there, at least 50% are like from old ages they are staying there, and the rest they are in every like every time the devotees come, so they just come with a positive note that they want to protect the turtles so that they can just donate in the temple pond. So otherwise we haven't seen any interbreeding hybrids, but yeah, sure, for the long-term program we can go and to check for this kind of interbreeding, whether there is a problem with interbreeding is going on or not. But I guess in this closed system there might be chances, like, so this is my assumption, it's not because we have to test the things, like if we want to make some like justification, like. Thank you.
All right, I've got one more. Are there any rituals built around releasing the juvenile black soft shells that are in the temple ponds? And if there are those turtles hatched and raised near the temple pond?
Okay, just let me check the question. It's about, are there any religious rituals on releasing juvenile tracks of turtle in temple ponds? And if yes, are they hatched and raised near the pond? Okay, there, as I said that we have a mythological belief of like turtle, like actually. Okay, so as we consider them as a Kurma avatar, also the Kupara, so who is holding the whole world over his back. And as I said, there are a lot of like rituals, because we northeastern India is full of like communities, like we have different set of like traditional cultures, mythological beliefs also, and taboos, and these things are associated. We have that kind of religious rituals where turtles are being donated, especially the black soft shell turtle, because black soft shell turtle, we say it like bor kaso. Bor means big, and the it will provide you the longevity in your life. So this turtle is bigger in size. So the mythological belief and the taboo is that people think that if I can have that age of that turtle in me, so that we can donate the turtles. So it's a ritual part kind of things which is going on. And for the second part, and if yes, then they hatched and raised near ponds. Yes, as I said, like we this year only, like we, and in way back also, like we have collected so many eggs, but the hardest part is that there is lack of like nesting sites. Okay, because there is the whole temple is not being like taken is not taking care of the turtles in that way, because they have some mythological value. They don't have the thing of like a mindset of a conservationist, and really the turtles are nesting there, and they are also hatching, because as I have shared that we have successfully hatched the turtles right there. Okay, and so altogether, if we can in nearby future, we can create more number of like nesting beaches near the pond, and we can provide some sufficient prohibition zone so that they can breed and nest there, and surely we can get more number of turtles right there. But our main motto is not to keep the turtles hatchlings in directly into the like those temple ponds. Instead, we have to like streamline the whole program with along with all the stakeholders, so that we can release them in the wild with a gradual process. Like, thank you.
Thank you. This is some great work, and thank you for sharing it with us. And I want to thank all of our presenters and everyone who joined us today for week 3. Be sure to tune in next Thursday, August 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time for week 4. And we're going to look at field techniques and turtles on the move. And be sure not to miss it. And we'll have more presenters for you from around the world. Thank you very much, everyone. And we will see you next week.